Hey guys, this is Fiction Life. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video we will see third part, what if Harry Potter was torn between love and destiny. Here is short summary. As peace settles and Voldemort disappears, Harry finally gets a chance at a normal life, growing closer to Ginny. But when his bond with deepens in unexpected ways, he's forced into a choice that could change everything. Caught between love and destiny, Harry must decide not just who he cares for, but who he's meant to become. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Harry groaned as a fifth year that he didn't know gave him a nod and a thumbs up. Shaking his head, he looked away. If he got one more, you're the man, he was seriously going to hit someone. It looked like Ginny had told any and everyone that she could find just what she had seen in Hermione's dorm yesterday, so now he was once again the main center of attention. Harry sighed. He could kind of understand why she would do it. After all, he'd be seriously pissed too, but that didn't mean he had to like it. Or even tolerate it, he thought, throwing a glower to a couple of third years who were whispering and pointing in his direction. Even though Harry had given them what he thought was one of his most intimidating looks, the two younger boys just grinned, gave him overly obvious winks and a set-up double thumbs up. He groaned again. "Come on, mate," Ron said jovially, joining him at the foot of the stairs. "It's not that bad, now there aren't any doubts left." Harry frowned. "What are you talking about, Ron?" "I'm talking about your battle with you-know-who," the redhead finished, pushing a gawking second year out of his way so that he could have a seat on the back of the couch. His mate's brows furrowed. "What does me getting the thumbs up every 5 seconds like I'm a bloody automobile dealer have to do with Voldemort?" "Oi, keep that down," Ron hissed, flinching at the name before rolling his eyes. "It's quite simple really," he continued in a tone that implied it was obvious. "If you can get Hermione to shag you, then obviously you can do anything." Harry punched his mate in the arm. "Cut it out, Ron." The redhead laughed. "Cut what out?" Hermione quizzed, entering the portrait. When several of the students stopped and gave her curious looks, she frowned. "Don't you people have someplace to be?" she inquired loudly, scanning the room. Harry winced. Crap, she was in a bad mood. "They may not, but we do," he offered. "What do you say we head down to breakfast?" She frowned at him. "I don't think I can do the Great Hall right now, Harry." He sighed and approached her. Lightly taking her arms, he gave her a grim look. "Come on, Hermione, a spot of food will make you feel better. Besides, we have to face everyone sooner or later, so we might as well get it over with." When her chin took on a familiar stubborn set, Harry frowned at her. "Hermione Granger, there is no way I'm allowing you to hide out up here. You're going down to have breakfast with everyone else, just like you made me second year after I found out I spoke Parseltongue and everyone thought I was evil, or fourth year after I got picked for the Tri-Wizard and most of the student population thought I had cheated." She bit her lip, wavering. "Harry, I don't know." "I do. Look, don't act like you're ashamed of us. That's what Ginny wanted. Please, Hermione," he implored softly. "I'm not ashamed," she responded confidently. "Good, then let's go to breakfast." Smiling, he took her hand and led her out of the portrait with Ron close behind. "Geez, maybe you two do belong together," the other boy stated, catching up with them and walking on the other side of Hermione. "I may regret this, but why do you say that?" she queried. He threw her a look and shook his head. "Because I never would have been able to get you out of that room, and he did it in less than 2 minutes, Ron replied with a grin. He then gave a thoughtful look. "You know, now that I think about it, had you and I still been together, I totally would have sent Harry to get you." His mates shared a look and then burst into laughter. As they continued to the Great Hall, laughing and talking, Harry did his best to ignore the looks and whispers that followed the sight of the head girl and the Quidditch captain holding hands. He also made sure to give Hermione's hand a reassuring squeeze every minute or so, just to keep her calm. Harry almost sighed in relief when they finally made it to the Gryffindor table. "Good morning," Hermione said with a light smile to Seamus, Dean and Neville as they took a seat. The first two boys returned her greeting, but the latter just frowned and got up from the table. Harry watched curiously as he gathered his things and exited the Great Hall without another word. "What the hell was that about?" Ron voiced, beating Harry to the question. "Don't know," Seamus responded with a shake of the head. "He's been acting a bit queer all morning though." "Whatever it is, I'm sure he'll get over it soon," Dean commented, taking a sip of his drink. Ron and Harry shared a shrug and began to immediately pile their plates with bangers, eggs and toast. Do you guys really need that much to eat? Hermione sniffed. Harry sighed. I guess not, he commented as he placed 3 out of his 5 pieces of toast back on the platter along with 4 of his 8 bangers. See, Hermione commented with a smile. Now if you're still hungry after that you can get some more at that time. Harry sighed and shook his head. You might as well say, yes dear, Dean quipped with a grin from across the table that turned into a wince when Hermione kicked him. Pig, she said to Ron who had snorted into his eggs at the other boy's remark. The redhead didn't comment but instead threw her a smirk and continued to shovel food into his mouth like he hadn't eaten in days. Hermione gave a disgusted scoff, while Harry chuckled at the exchange. Things were back to normal. With this thought and a grin he reached for his pumpkin juice, however before he could get it to his lips Ron grabbed the glass from his hands. Oi, you have your own you know. Harry exclaimed, glaring at his mate. Instead of responding, Ron held up a single finger and swallowed his food before taking the pumpkin juice, putting to his nose and taking a sniff. The other occupants of the table watched with baffled expressions as he then proceeded to swirl the liquid around and sniff it once more, before picking up his own glass and comparing the colors. Harry frowned as he mate then took a sip from both glasses before setting Harry's back down in front of him and turning once more to his own breakfast. Ron, what was that about? Harry asked, while pushing the glass of juice away. Ron swallowed his toast and took another sip of his drink before answering. Big brother duties, he commented with a shrug. At their blank looks he explained, you see Jin is convinced that Hermione's been slipping you some type of love potion, so I told her I would check it out for her you know, big brother duties. Dean and Seamus sniggered, Harry rolled his eyes and Hermione frowned. You think I used a potion on Harry? She asked with a hurt look. No, of course not, Ron said quickly, but Ginny was so adamant about it that I promised her I would check. When the brunette continued to frown her gave her a pleading look. Please understand Hermione, she was in tears and I hate to see my sister that way. I would have promised almost anything to make her feel better. Harry looked back at his girlfriend and saw her give a light nod of the head. Of course Ron, she commented running a hand through her hair. Harry leaned over and gave her a light peck on the lips. When her startled gaze flew to him, he smiled. You looked like you could use one. He responded softly, and since we don't have to keep everything a secret anymore I decided to oblige. Hermione blushed and looked down at the table. Woohoo, Dean exclaimed with a grin, someone call the fire department, we have a 4-alarm going on. Hermione threw him an annoyed look, while Harry and Seamus laughed. Fire department? Ron asked looking up from his 6th piece of toast. As Dean attempted to explain what a fire department was, and the fact that a fireman was not made of fire to Ron, Harry chuckled and took a bite of his jam-covered toast. As he reached for his glass his hand froze and a look of dismay crossed his features. Now what am I supposed to drink? He whined. How about spilling your drink? Seamus suggested, then it'll magically refill and you'll have a fresh one. It's not just magic, it's poor end house elves, Hermione informed him with a reproachful look before looking at Harry, and don't you dare. Harry shrugged, I wouldn't anyway, Ron's had his ruddy mouth on it. Oi, I brushed my teeth, Ron exclaimed, lifting his head from his plate. Harry shuddered when a piece of egg flew from his mouth and landed on the side of the cup in question. Disgusting Ronald, just disgusting, Hermione grumbled, the other 3 boys nodded in agreement while Ron blushed. Here Harry, she said, passing him her cup. Thanks, he responded before giving Ron a fierce look, and don't even think about tasting this one. The redhead pulled a face but didn't comment, instead going back to his kippers. Ah, you two are so cute, Dean teased as Hermione took a sip from the cup after Harry sat it down. Hey, I'm cute she's beautiful, get it right, Harry told the other boy with a smirk. Hermione blushed. Dean laughed and nodded before tucking into the rest of his breakfast. Hermione nudged Harry playfully and the group continued to eat, settling into a comfortable conversation. After everyone was pretty much finished Ron was still nibbling on a piece of toast. The trio got up and made their way out of the Great Hall. Well looky here boys, Draco sneered as they passed. If it isn't the blood traitor, the scarhead and the groupie. Harry glowered at the, shove it Malfoy, he said in a steely tone. Perhaps you should be making that request of Granger, he smirked, his minions tittered. Harry made a move towards the other boy but Ron grabbed him. "Sod off, Malfoy," he spat before looking at Harry. "Don't let him get to you, mate. Come on, let's just go." "Yeah, Harry, just forget it," Hermione whispered from his left. "You know, Granger, if I realized that you had so much to offer," Malfoy wagged his brows as his cronies chortled. "I just may have considered acknowledging you every once in a while." Harry's wand snapped up at that comment and pointed at the Slytherin's neck. "Cool it, mate," Ron hissed, grabbing the dark-haired boy's arm and forcing it down. He then made a small motion towards the staff table with his head. Looking over, Harry saw Snape watching them with a scornful expression. Malfoy followed their gaze and upon seeing the potion's master he smirked. "What's the matter, Potter? Afraid of a little detention?" he taunted. "Don't press your luck, Malfoy," Harry ground out. The blonde smirked once more. "So, I guess this makes you what? An honorary Weasley or something, right? After all, Weasel, we all know how big your piss-poor family is on." He looked at Hermione and leered, "Hand-me-downs." Ron and Harry both moved to raise their wands, but before they could get them up, a fist shot out and connected with the blonde boy's face. Harry's surprised gaze flew to his girlfriend, who was staring down at the crumpled Slytherin with a murderous expression, before looking up. "Did anyone else have any smarmy comments that they wanted to make?" she demanded, quickly scanning the shocked crowd with furious eyes. All of the students who came in contact with her heated gaze quickly shook their heads. No, while several even went so far as to rush off to their respective classes. "That was bloody brilliant," Ron exclaimed in an awestruck tone, while Harry nodded his head enthusiastically in agreement. Hermione's gaze flew to her best mate and her boyfriend, and the anger dissipated to be replaced by a blush at their broad smiles. Well, that is. Ms. Granger," a stern voice said from their left. Everyone looked to see Deputy Headmistress McGonagall standing there with a frown. "A word, if you will." She then looked at Crabbe and Goyle. "Boys, please make yourselves useful and help Mr. Malfoy to Madame Pomfrey's office." She looked back at Hermione. "Now, Ms. Granger." Hermione cringed at McGonagall's firm tone. Frowning, she threw an anxious look to Harry and Ron before nervously chewing on her bottom lip and silently following the older woman down the halls towards her office. What had she been thinking? She usually knew better than to rise to the bait of Malfoy's obnoxious comments and small jibes. It was just that she had been putting up with it all day, and his vulgar comment was the last straw. Hermione ran a hand nervously through her hair as McGonagall turned another corner. "This day only seems to be getting better and better," she thought as they neared the professor's office. It had all started that morning when she had gone downstairs to do her morning rounds. When she and Zach met up in their designated spot, Hermione had offered him a smile and a wave, which the boy didn't return. Instead, he just frowned and stiffly informed her that perhaps they should do their rounds separately that morning. Since at the time she had had no idea that Ginny had spread what had happened like wildfire, Hermione had been merely confused at his actions and simply agreed. However, by the end of her rounds she had gone from confused to annoyed by all of the looks and whispers she had been getting from the few students that were up and about. Her mood quickly progressed from annoyed to a mix between anger and mortification when she finally realized just what was going on. This came about when Lavender and the Pottle twins cornered her and in hushed, very giggly tones asked if the boy who lived was also the boy who could shag. Giving them a shocked look and a fierce glower, Hermione had huffed and stormed back to the Gryffindor common room, glaring at anyone who stared at her with a newfound sense of self-righteous anger. How dare they assume that just because Ginny Weasley had said that she and Harry shagged that they did? Even if it was true, they didn't know that, the bunch of gits. "Ms. Granger," the professor questioned, pulling her out of her wayward thoughts. "Are you going to go into the office, or just continue trying to intimidate my door?" Hermione's eyes widened as she realized that she had been glaring. Blushing, she quickly schooled her features into a look of remorse. "Sorry, Professor," she mumbled, turning the knob and entering the medium-sized office. "Have a seat," the older woman said, going to take one behind her desk. Hermione complied, glancing nervously around the office and fidgeting absently with the sleeves of her robes. After a moment of silence, she looked hesitantly back at the professor. "You do know, Ms. Granger," the older woman said when Hermione made eye contact, "that it is not the type of impression we want to make for our younger students, that it is okay for them to go around hitting one another." Yes ma'am, she murmured blushing. And it trust you realize that as head girl it is of the utmost importance that you, above all others, follow this principle. Yes ma'am. So then I assume that it is safe to say that I no longer need to be concerned that I will once again come across one of my esteemed heads, dismembering or incapacitating any other students or members of the staff no matter how obnoxious they may be. Hermione blushed. Yes ma'am. Good, I'm glad that's settled. The younger witch threw the older one a surprised look. That's all. On this subject, yes, why did you wish for more, Ms. Granger? No, Professor, not at all, she said quickly and moving to stand. However, McGonagall continued, there is another matter I wish to discuss with you. Hermione frowned and sat back down. Yes. I know that it is sometimes hard for girls being at school and away from their mothers. I must admit that after all of these years, the ups, the downs and the circles that I have taken with Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley and yourself, I consider you in a somewhat different light than I consider most of the other students in this school, Professor McGonagall said. In truth, over these last several years I have begun to see you as, well, as sort of like a daughter to me. She blushed uncharacteristically and looked away briefly, and it is because of this sentiment that I feel it is very important that we have a bit of a chat. A chat? Really? Hermione inquired nervously. Yes, really. You know, as implausible as it may seem to you, I was once a young girl myself and I do in fact understand how these things work. I realize that at your age, you have certain urges. The brunette's eyes widened and her face took on a horrified expression. Professor, just what is this talk about? McGonagall gave her a grim look. Don't be obtuse, Ms. Granger, it's about the birds and the bees, of course. Hermione groaned. Harry gave his girlfriend a curious look as she entered the classroom over 20 minutes late. Hermione immediately went to the front of the class, handed Professor Cypher a note and quietly made her way back to her desk. After she took a seat next to him, Harry frowned when she opened her book without giving him a second glance. Giving her a nudge in the side, his curiosity became piqued when she looked at him for a second before blushing profusely and turning away. What the hell was that about? 3 hours later he found out when he and Ron finally got what had happened out of Hermione at lunch. When she told them about her conversation with the professor, Harry turned a dangerous shade of red while Ron laughed so hard he spurted juice out of his nose. Just disgusting, Ronald, Hermione said for the second time that day, frowning at her red-haired best mate. You, McGonagall, birds, bees, he got out between peals of laughter, effin' classic. Oh, shut your cake hole, Ronald, she exclaimed, throwing a roll at the other boy. When Ron not only continued to laugh but also began to hiccup and wipe tears from his eyes, Harry found himself having trouble not finding the sound contagious. Ow! He yelped as his girlfriend hit him in the arm when he joined in on Ron's merriment. I'm sorry, Harry said, chuckling, but you have to admit, had it been anyone but you, you would be laughing too. She frowned, but it wasn't anyone but me, so cut it out. Still grinning, Harry placed his arm around her shoulder and pulled her against him. Come on, love, have a sense of humor, he teased. She gave him an annoyed look for a moment before emitting a resigned sigh. Okay, fine, Harry grinned, but just so you know, she took away my dorm privileges. What? He asked, frowning. Hermione gave him a serious look. I can no longer have boys in my dorm. She arched a brow and smirked, so go on, laugh. Harry stared at her with a shocked expression, while Ron wore one of morbid merriment. A huge smile was frozen on his face and he stared at Harry wide-eyed as if debating if it was safe enough to laugh. For how long? Harry sputtered. She shrugged. 1 week, 1 month, indefinitely, who knows? Pass the crisps, will you, Ron? Sniggering, the redhead did as requested and Harry shot him a glare. When will you know? The dark-haired boy inquired. Hermione looked at him with a thoughtful expression. Oh, I don't know, she said I would find out after she got Zach's opinion. After all, he is head boy, so issues with the students and their privileges are part of his domain. What? He exclaimed before glaring at his girlfriend when she quirked a grin. You're pulling my broom, aren't you? She gave him a sweet smile. Of course I am, after all you did tell me to have a sense of humor. Ron let out a loud hoot, and began laughing once more. Harry shook his head at his girlfriend while she gave him a superior smirk. Touché, he commented with a chuckle. Hermione responded with a slight incline of her head and a wink. You know what? Ron said as his laughter died down a bit. "No what?" Harry teased while taking Hermione's hand and ing the back of it. "The more I see you two together, the more I wonder how I couldn't have seen you two together," the other boy responded with a shake of the head and a wondrous expression. "I've never seen anyone get her out of her moods like you can, mate. It boggles the mind really." "Most things boggle your mind, Ron," Hermione commented dryly. The redhead pulled face. "Geez, see if I compliment you again." Hermione snorted. That was supposed to be a compliment. "No one can get me out of my moods. I mean really, Ronald, you're a regular Don Juan." Ron frowned. "Who?" She rolled her eyes heavenward. "Never mind." "No, tell me who it is." "Forget it, Ron." "No way, if that was an insult I have a right to know, right Harry?" Both looked at the dark-haired boy expectantly. "So, more crisps anyone?" Harry asked with an uncomfortable grin. "Ah mate, you're not going to back me up on this." Ron whined. "What happened to that male solidarity thing we talked about?" Hermione frowned. "What male solidarity thing?" Harry threw his mate a glower and Ron Winston shrugged. "Ron, what male solidarity thing?" When the redhead went back to his sandwich she looked at Harry. "Well, what male solidarity thing? What does that mean, and why are you two acting so guilty?" Harry Winston looked down at his watch. "Oops, time for class," he said, hopping up quickly and rushing out of the hall with Ron following closely behind. "Harry, get back here," Hermione called, gathering her books. "Harry, Harry." Harry nuzzled his girlfriend's neck. "Harry, cut it out," Hermione muttered, swatting playfully at his face and not looking up from her text. He grinned. "What love? I can't help it, you just look so adorable right now." She looked over her shoulder and smirked at him. "Well, you'll have to. We really need to study, NEWTs are just around the corner." He rolled his eyes and gave a sigh. "Fine." As she turned back to her book, Harry tilted his head back, resting it against the large tree behind him. Looking up at the sky above, he marveled at how well everything had been going lately. At first, when everyone had found out about him and Hermione, there had been a lot of whispering, speculation and rumors floating throughout the school. However, those had died down quite a bit towards the end of the first day. He had a feeling Malfoy's broken nose had a lot to do with it. And everyone had quickly accepted that a duo from the Golden Trio had paired off once again. Honestly, Harry had actually been quite surprised by how swiftly everyone seemed to truly accept his relationship with Hermione. But he was even more stunned by how many people told him that they weren't surprised and that they had actually expected Hermione to be with him instead of Ron in the first place. He smiled to himself, had also been blessedly nightmare-free since the one with Bellatrix, and with Hermione as his girlfriend he was doing a hell of a lot better in all of his classes, which meant that his waking hours were peaceful too. He had aced his transfiguration potion, much to Snape's dismay, and he had begun pulling higher marks in every single one of his classes, even the ones he and Hermione didn't have together. Harry smiled and lightly edged the top of his girlfriend's head. In fact, now, at her insistence, they were studying for NEWTs in the courtyard. He gave a wry grin. Well, he was supposed to be studying. And since the test was rumored to be so nasty, even Ron had readily agreed to give up his Saturday to sit outside and study with him and Hermione, oh, and Luna, of course. The red-haired boy was sitting almost shoulder to shoulder with Harry, leaning against the other side of the large tree trunk. Ron and Luna were sitting in the same position as he and Hermione, with the sitting securely between her boyfriend's legs, reading a text on Transfiguration for her end-of-the-year essay. Meanwhile, Ron teetered between paying attention to his own Transfiguration book and staring at his girlfriend. I guess Ron isn't studying either, he thought with a chuckle. Then again, he's also not likely to be the one quizzed by his girlfriend later on what he had learned. Harry mentally sighed and lightly stroked Hermione's waist while looking absently at his potions book. He stared at the text on the pages for a couple of minutes before he was once again drawn back into thought. The only cloud over his newfound relationship seemed to be his old one. Since the breakup, his and Ginny's relationship had been extremely strained. Though the red-headed girl spoke to him, quite often in fact, the things that she said were so off that he didn't know how to take them. She still insisted that he was under some type of spell or potion. She had also taken to touching him whenever possible, and on more than one occasion she had attempted to him. Luckily, because he had been there for her conversation with Hermione and had had several warnings from Ron, He already knew what she was about, which made it easier to not only evade Ginny's advances, but also avoid being put into positions where he would have to be on guard for them. Harry sighed. Well, it could be worse. She wasn't even talking to Hermione unless it was hurling insults or hexes. Good thing his girlfriend was quite adept with protection spells and counter curses, or she would be spending every other day in Madame Pomfrey's office. He had been quite upset when he had first heard about Ginny's actions towards Hermione, but it didn't take long for him to realize that his girlfriend had no problem at all handling herself against the younger Weasley. No, what really troubled him was the strain in the relationship between Ginny and Ron. He and Hermione deserved what they got, but Ron, he sighed again, though the relationship between the Weasley siblings wasn't as bad as the one between Hermione and Ginny, it was still bad. The younger girl didn't try to curse or hex her brother, but she also didn't try anything else either. When Ron would talk to her, she would usually turn and walk away, or worse yet stand there and ignore him, looking right through him as if her were invisible. What made Harry feel so guilty was the fact that Ginny seemed to have forgiven him and not her brother, who, by the way, was as innocent as her in the whole mess. It was during one particularly guilt-ridden moment that Harry had asked Ginny why she treated Ron the way she did. She had responded that it was because Ron had chosen Hermione over her, so Harry had pointed out, somewhat hesitantly, that he had in essence done the same thing. But the red-headed girl had just smiled, patted him softly on the cheek and informed him that it wasn't the same. Knowing what Ginny was implying, he then tried to once again stress the fact that Hermione had not placed him under any spell or given him any type of love potion. But she had waved him off and hurried into her class. Harry sighed for a third time. He was really beginning to think Ginny had cracked her nut. "What are you brooding about?" Hermione asked, turning and giving him a look. He shook his head lightly. "Nothing." "Harry," she said, arching a brow. He exhaled. "I just don't understand how things can be so great and so horrible at the same time." "Come on, Harry, NEWTs aren't that bad." He chuckled. "Not what I was referring to, love." "Oh, then what?" she quizzed, her brows furrowing. He sat down his book and fiddled absently with a blade of grass. "Ginny." "What about her?" She frowned. "Her relationship with Ron," he whispered, throwing a look to his mate to make sure he hadn't heard. Lucky for him, Ron was so wrapped up in listening to Luna read softly aloud that he remained oblivious to the conversation. Hermione bit her lip. "Harry, that's not your fault." "Yes it is," he insisted. "No it isn't," she retorted, "it's Ginny's. She needs to grow up. If she wants to be mad at me, fine, but everyone knows that she treats you like a mate and treats Ron like crap when it should be reversed." "I know. Of course you know, everyone knows, weren't you listening?" she inquired, turning and facing him fully. "Of course I was, Oh, sod off, Malfoy." Harry and Hermione's gazes flew across the courtyard where Ginny Weasley was being accosted by Draco Malfoy. Quickly getting up, Harry and Ron rushed over to the pair with raised wands. "Back off, Malfoy," Harry yelled. "Step away from my sister before I hex your ass," Ron added with a glower. "Ooh, I'm so scared, Weasel," Draco smirked. "Pulleys, everyone knows you couldn't hex your way out of a cauldron. Besides, I'm not anywhere near the Weaselette anyway, I wouldn't want to get blood traitor on me." "Yeah, well, you're going to get a lot more on you if you don't get lost now," Harry stated quietly. "Harry," Hermione commented, touching his arm lightly. "Calm down, I'm sure that it was nothing." "Nothing," Ron bellowed, throwing the brunette a harassed look and ignoring the anxious glances from his girlfriend. "He was hassling my sister." Draco smirked. I can handle myself, thank you very much," Ginny Weasley interrupted, glaring at her brother. "So just mind your business and stay out of mine." Ron gave her a surprised look. "Gin, what? We were having a private conversation, so it would do you all well to just butt out," the younger girl exclaimed before, to everyone's surprise, grabbing the blonde Slytherin's hand. "Come on, Draco, let's go somewhere where we can talk alone." Everyone watched in wide-eyed shock as Ginny Weasley dragged Draco Malfoy through the courtyard and into the school building. The boy threw a bewildered look to his cronies, who just stood with stupefied looks on their faces and their mouths gaping. "What the hell, mate?" Ron exclaimed, throwing Harry a confused look. Having no response, the dark-haired boy just frowned. Harry scowled as Ginny and Draco walked hand in hand onto the Quidditch pitch. Ever since that day 2.5 weeks ago, the two had been just about inseparable. They were joined at the hip, and usually the Lips, as Hogwarts' newest and most controversial couple. The dark-haired boy ran an agitated hand through his hair. He didn't know what the hell was going on. One day Ginny had hated Draco just like the other 90% of the student population, the next she was snogging him in the hallway in front of everyone. In fact, her and Draco's snog fests were so common and disgusting, that there wasn't a house around that hadn't grown tired of the new couple already. On top of that, they had gotten caught in the act by professors multiple times, which had caused a massive loss of points for both Gryffindor and Slytherin. It had also made Ginny the new enemy of her house. Ron and Harry were both baffled as why the youngest Weasley was doing what she was doing, not to mention what they could do about it. Also, to make matters worse, when the other boy had told his mum and dad about his sister's latest activities, he had gotten blamed for it. Mrs. Weasley had even accused him of not looking out for her. Ron had been hacked off at Harry for several days over that one, since they both knew that if it was anyone's fault it was Harry's. As a matter of fact, that seemed to be the general consensus of the whole school. Everyone thought that Ginny was just using the Slytherin in a last-ditch effort to get the dark-haired Gryffindor back by making him jealous. As for Draco, everyone assumed that he was in it just to piss Harry off, which, as much as Harry hated to admit it, was bloody well working. "Give it a bleed and rest, will ya?" Dean called from his broom. Ginny threw him a disgruntled look as Draco made his way down her neck. "Are you playing Ginny, or do we have to use one of the reserves?" Harry inquired sharply. She gave a sweet smile. "I'm coming. Maybe later," Draco responded with a suggestive wink. When she tittered, Harry and Dean groaned. "Ugh, gross," grumbled the other boy, flying further away from the couple. Harry didn't comment, but instead frowned as she took a dark broom from the Slytherin and placed it in front of her. "Do you like it?" she asked with a grin. "It's Draco's. I let her use it," the blonde smirked, "you know, until I could get her new one." "What's wrong with your old one?" Harry ground out. "Nothing," Ginny stated with a shrug, hopping on the broom. "Yeah, nothing," Draco echoed, arching a brow. "She just likes riding my broom." When the red-haired girl giggled, Harry growled. Quickly turning, he flew away to rally the rest of the team, who were staring angrily at the couple. As he rounded the pitch and flew up to look for the snitch, he threw another look to the blonde prat. Harry looked to his left, scanning the perimeter of the pitch for the small golden ball. The game had just started and already Gryffindor was up 10-0. He gave an anxious look down to the chasers below. So far Ginny seemed to be doing okay, but there was no telling how long that would last. Several of the members of the team had expressed concerns about the younger Weasley's somewhat erratic behavior as of late. Others had just come out and flatly stated that they were worried that she would throw the game, just to get back at Harry or to make Draco happy. Harry had readily stood up for her, along with Ron, both stating that Ginny would never do something like that. However, their bravado was short-lived as they realized that they didn't think she would ever get involved with the likes of Malfoy either. Harry was brought back to the present as a burst of cheers sprang from the crowd below. Looking at the scoreboard, he noticed with some dismay that Ravenclaw had just made a goal, so the points were now tied 10-10. Pushing away his disappointment, he began to once again search for the snitch with added determination. So far Gryffindor had had a perfect season and he wasn't going to lose that. No, for his final year at Hogwarts he was going to lead his team to victory and bring the Quidditch Cup back to his house for another term. Leaning forward and squinting a bit, he saw something glint in the sunlight. The snitch, he thought, going forward on his broom. Just as he was about to pick up speed, a loud screech rang out. "What the hell?" Harry muttered, turning his attention to the ground below. Looking down, he saw Madame Hooch standing in the middle of the field with a whistle to her lips. Noticing that she now had the attention of the student populace, she placed her wand to her throat and spoke. "I have an announcement," she stated in a loud echoing voice. The Quidditch players sat straighter on their brooms while the crowd leaned forward. "Today's Quidditch match between Gryffindor and Ravenclaw has been cancelled until further notice." "What? You've got to be kidding me!" Harry and Cho yelled simultaneously. "Can they do that?" Mike Telly, one of the Ravenclaw chasers, questioned, throwing Cho an incredulous look. "Players, please touch down onto the pitch and proceed into the locker rooms to change back into your school attire. All other students, please follow your respective heads back to your houses. Prefects, be sure to keep a close eye on the younger students and make sure to proceed in an orderly fashion." Harry and Ron shared shocked looks as they came down onto the pitch. What the hell is going on, Harry? Ron questioned in a harsh whisper as soon as they met up. As the remainder of the Gryffindor team and a few of the Ravenclaws gave him questioning looks, he threw Ron a glare. I was up there with you, so I wouldn't bloody well know, now would I? The dark-haired boy retorted. Bloody Pratt can't whisper worth a shite, he finished in a mumble. Ron scoffed and rolled his eyes, implying that he had heard his mate's comment. Well, it doesn't matter now, does it, considering you don't know anything any bleedin' way? He replied as they headed into the locker area. Quickly changing out of their Quidditch gear, the team hurriedly made their way back to the dorms to see if they could find out what was going on. Upon reaching the crowded common room several minutes later, they were disappointed to find that no new information had been given and everyone seemed as baffled as they were as to why the game was cancelled. As the buzz began to wind down and the common area slowly cleared out, Harry fidgeted nervously with the sleeve of his jumper. He hadn't seen Hermione since just before the game. He knew as head girl she was probably helping the professors out with whatever the problem was, but he was getting a bit worried. When the portrait opened, his gaze snapped to the entrance and he gave a disgruntled huff of breath when Ron entered. "Gee mate, good to see you too," the redhead commented with a smirk. "Sorry, have you seen Hermione?" Harry asked anxiously. "Sorry mate, no such luck," Ron replied, sitting heavily on the couch. Harry sighed. Letting his head fall back, he stared blankly at the ceiling. Ron had been called out to help the other house prefect, Natalie McDonald, almost as soon as he and Harry had entered. Professor McGonagall had come into the room a minute or two after the Quidditch team and ordered the two to do one last sweep for any stragglers. Harry had been dismayed that he hadn't been able to help, but he had hoped that Ron would at least come across Hermione and be able to let him know that she was okay. Turning his head, he looked at the profile of his best mate. "Any news on what's going on?" he inquired. Ron gave a hitch of the shoulders. "Nah, they didn't tell us anything but to check the hall for students. Didn't come across any either. Pity," he stated, looking at his dark-haired friend. "Would have loved the opportunity to bust one of those slimy Slytherins. I just know that they're behind this." As Harry nodded in agreement, the portrait door opened once more. Sitting up, he gave a relieved smile when the familiar face of his girlfriend greeted him. "Hermione," he said, rushing to meet her. "Hey," she replied with a small smile as he pulled her into a hug and placed a light on her lips. "Are you okay? What's going on?" he quizzed while checking her for bruises. "I'm fine, Harry," Hermione responded, giving smile at his actions. "I wasn't there. I was at the game just like everyone else when they announced the cancellation. Right after Madam Hooch broadcasted the first part, Professor McGonagall showed up and told me to go and meet up with Zach." "To do what?" Harry asked. "Yeah, what's going on?" Ron added. The brunette gave a look around the room. Though it was a lot emptier than before, there were still several students hanging around and they all seemed to be doing their best to hear the trio's conversation. "Let's head up to my dorm," Hermione stated, ignoring the groans of his students that had been attempting to eavesdrop. The two boys nodded in agreement and quickly followed her to her portrait door. "Well?" Ron asked as soon as they made it up to her sitting room with the door closed firmly behind them. Hermione sighed and flopped down onto the couch. "Well, it was a breach." "A breach?" Harry questioned as he took a seat and placed an arm around his girlfriend. "A breach?" Ron echoed, plopping onto the chair and watching the dark-haired girl closely. "Well," she said with a frown, "kind of. It was an attempted breach. Someone had tried to enter through the waters surrounding the school. Luckily the mermaids found out and notified Dumbledore." "How did they find out?" Harry asked. She gave a light shrug. "Don't know. We didn't receive that much information. Basically they told us what they needed us to know in order to help assist with the search of the grounds." "What were you looking for?" Ron inquired with a frown. "You didn't go alone, did you?" Harry asked simultaneously. "We were checking to make sure that no one had gotten onto the grounds that wasn't supposed to be here. The mermaids said that the person turned back just before making it to shore, but Dumbledore wanted to be sure, and no, I went with Professor McGonagall. So he cancelled the Quidditch match," Harry stated. Hermione nodded. "So then they're sure that it was someone evil. It had to be, otherwise why try to sneak onto the grounds?" she responded, laying her head on his shoulder. Hermione gave a contented sigh as her boyfriend pulled her closer and lightly stroked her arm. "So you didn't find anything?" he asked. When she shook her head, Ron chimed in, "Then how did they know that the mermaids weren't full of it?" Why would they lie, Ronald? She asked, throwing him an annoyed look. I mean, really. Do you think they made it up just to annoy you? Oh wait, I know, maybe they're big Ravenclaw supporters and they thought Gryffindor would win, so they concocted the story so you'd have to cancel your game. Of course not, the redhead responded, blushing. Then why ask such a stupid question? Blimey, leave his head there, love. Harry cut in with a chuckle. He may need it. Why, he doesn't seem to be using it, she muttered. Ron scoffed while Harry grinned. He's just confused and trying to get as much information as possible. I swear he's not asking you questions just to set you off. Hermione sighed. I know, I'm worried, Harry. It's been a while since your last dream, and if this is Vivo Voldemort. Don't worry, the school's well protected. Look how quickly Dumbledore found out about what happened today. You're perfectly safe. She sat quietly for a moment before giving him an anxious look. But are you? He gave her a lopsided smile. Of course, love, don't worry about me, okay? I can't help it. Well, try, he replied before leaning down and ing her lightly on her lips. The second that his lips touched hers, Harry knew that he wouldn't be able to pull away, and he knew Hermione felt the same when her fingers threaded themselves in his dark locks. Okay, Ron muttered, awkward, I'm just gonna, go now. So, yeah. When he heard the soft click of the portrait door, Harry knew that his friend had left. However, he also knew that he didn't care. Harry walked into his girlfriend's dorm and plopped down heavily onto the couch next to her, emitting a loud groan. Are you okay? Hermione asked with an amused look. No more questions please, he said, placing his hand over his face. Oh, stop being such a baby, Hermione laughed, he groaned. Still smiling, she moved over and placed a light on his chin before moving to his neck. Did you need me to make you feel better? Harry removed his hand from his face and looked at her. Yeah, that would be great, he whispered. Hermione gave him a wide smile before coming forward once more and capturing his lips in a gentle. Oh Merlin, a voice whined, just when my headache started to disappear I walk in on this. Harry pulled back and glared at Ron. Then maybe next time you should knock. The redhead gave a light shrug. Next time I will, but are you guys done this time? When Hermione adjusted and laid her head on his, Harry sighed, I guess. Good, the other boy said, flopping unceremoniously into one of the chairs. I've already been traumatized enough by that bloody test. I don't need to add watching Harry and Hermione snog to the list of issues for my therapist. Who said you had to watch? Perv, the dark-haired boy retorted. I wouldn't be able to help it. It's like a broom crash or something. You know it'll be disgusting but you just can't turn away, Ron responded with a shrug. Could we please change the subject? Hermione said, rubbing the bridge of her nose. Please, Harry muttered. Ron clapped his hands together. Okay then. On to less nauseating things. So, we did it. We're done, NEWTs are officially behind us. Harry grinned. I know, it's surreal, isn't it? I mean the hardest test of our wizarding lives and we make it out virtually unscathed. Ron grimaced. Speak for yourself, mate, though I do believe that I did just well enough that my mum won't kill me. What about you? I think I did pretty well. With Hermione's help studying I felt somewhat confident that I passed, the other boy stated with a smile. What about you, love, how do you think you did? He inquired looking down at dark-haired witch. I aced it, she responded, turning and giving him a wide grin. I just know it, I went in, cool, confident and prepared and I aced it. Congratulations, Harry replied giving her a light peck. Wow, normally you would be freaking out right about now, Ron responded with an incredulous look. Yeah, well with all the extra studying that we were able to get in I actually feel a tad more confident this time around. Oh, well that's good, I guess. You guess. Yeah, I just hope that you don't get overconfident, Ron stated nonchalantly while reaching forward and plucking a chocolate frog out of the dish on her table. Why shouldn't I get overconfident? Hermione asked with a frown. Did you hear something? She threw Harry an anxious look. Did you hear something? Oh no, I failed, didn't I? I bombed, completely blew it. She exclaimed abruptly standing. The biggest and most important test in my wizarding career and I blew it. I don't know what happened. I don't know how I could have blanked. Maybe I studied too much, maybe I didn't study enough, maybe. Ron's an idiot, Harry finished, catching his girlfriend mid-pace and pulling her into a hug. I'm sure that you did fantastic, love. Don't let Ron get you all worked up. You knew those questions backwards and forwards, and if I was able to recognize most of them with no problem, then I know that you were more than prepared. That's what I thought, but Hermione gave Harry a wide-eyed look when he placed a finger over her lips to silence her. But nothing, Hermione, you did great as always. I'm sure that you got a perfect score and will have your pick of every job out there, so stop worrying, he stated sternly. Harry, she started, he had her. Just relax and breathe, I hear that that's important, you know, he joked, pulling away. Harry led her over to the couch and drew her back into his arms as he took a seat. Okay, you're right, she said, releasing a breath. I know, Harry answered with a grin. She threw him an annoyed look and he laughed. Sorry about that, Hermione. Harry's right, I can be a bit of an idiot sometimes, Ron commented with a sheepish look. Forgive me. Of course I forgive you. Of course I'm right, Hermione and Harry stated at the same time. Ron threw the dark-haired boy a disgruntled look. You said that like it's happened more than once. It has, Harry replied cheekily, it's just that usually you were too obtuse to catch on. At that answer the redhead threw a pillow, which the other boy easily swatted away. You know you just finished a test that indicates that you're ready for the real world, so don't you think it's time you two started acting like adults? Hermione reprimanded with a frown. Harry and Ron shared a look. Yes dear, they quipped in unison, laughing when the brunette stuck her tongue out at them in response. As their laughter died down, Harry gave a light shake of the head. I can't believe that we're finally done. Yeah, party in the common room tonight to celebrate. It's over, finally it's over. Ron exclaimed, grabbing another chocolate frog to commemorate the occasion and throwing one to Harry so that he could join in. Harry grinned. No more potions, no more Snape. He called out, catching his frog mid-jump and taking a bite. No more having to watch slimy Slytherins snog my baby sister. Ron added, doing a cheers motion with the one leg that he had left from his. No more curfews. No more detentions. No more Filch. More importantly, no more Ms. Norris. I can't believe you guys. Hermione exclaimed, standing and frowning down at them. Do you even realize what's going on? What do you mean? Harry asked, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away. You keep going on about, no more this, and, no more that. Well, what about the other stuff? There will be no more of, huh? No more breakfasts together in the Great Hall. No more visiting Hagrid at his hut whenever we want. No more school Quidditch games. No more group trips to Hogsmeade or group study sessions. No more joking around at the end of each day or just hanging out together on weekends. Hermione, we'll have time for some of that stuff, Ron offered with a weak smile. And if we don't, then we'll make time for it, Harry added with a determined look. You still don't get it? She cried, looking frantic. Her boyfriend and mate exchanged worried looks. No more inseparable trio. No more running. No more protection during the fall. No more Dumbledore to watch out for you. No more delays. Tears began to stream unchecked down her face. No more, Harry. No more safety. No more avoidance. Now you will have to fight Voldemort. No more peace. No more. She crumpled onto the couch and wept into her hands. Harry quickly gathered her into his arms. I never thought of it that way, I'm sorry. But it'll be okay, Hermione, you'll see. Yeah, Ron chimed. As for the inseparable trio thing, I don't know about you, but I'm sure as hell not letting Harry leave me here to go gallivanting the countryside for the Horcruxes alone. Hermione laid her head against Harry's and turned to look at Ron. Gallivanting? She inquired with a sniffle and a watery smile. The boy gave a shrug. Hey, I hung around you for 7 years, something was bound to rub off sooner or later. She gave a wry grin. I guess. Harry rubbed her back. Please don't worry, love. Hey, look at it this way, at least now I'm officially a full-fledged wizard. Honestly, I'm a bit surprised that Voldemort has waited this long, but now that he has, I feel a lot more equipped to handle whatever it is he's going to throw at me. He pulled back and gave her a smile. Especially with you by my side. Oi, what am I, chopped liver? Ron exclaimed with an affronted look. Harry rolled his eyes. No, you're a bloody drama queen. Now could you shut your bleedin' cake hole? I'm trying to do something here. The redhead glared and muttered under his breath. You don't know that, Harry, Hermione whispered brokenly as her tears began anew. What if all we've done is still not enough? Hermione, Harry stated, studying his girlfriend. I may not know what the future holds, but I didn't know what the future held when I got accepted to Hogwarts, and look where it led me. I have friends, he looked at Ron, family. I have love, things I was taught I would never have, that I was unworthy of, are now mine. I know that we have a long battle ahead of us and things may get a little difficult at times, but we'll pull through together, same as always. He gave a sad smile. When I first learned of the prophecy I was terrified. I didn't want to die, but I didn't see how I could live. Yet here I am, just 2 years later, and though I'm still a bit afraid, I would have to be nuts not to be, I'm a lot more confident about my chances. You see then, I had just lost Sirius and I was terrified of losing the few people that I still had, I was terrified of losing myself. But now I have gained so much that I refuse to lose any of it, and I won't. I can't die when I have so much to live for, he said, wiping a tear from her face. Hermione released a shaky breath, but nothing. We've done enough and we'll still do more during whatever time we have left before the battle. Look, I'm under no delusions that I'm some incredibly powerful wizard that'll just blow the git away. However, I'm no longer the little baby that he once tried to murder either. Besides, he couldn't kill me then, and I'll be damned if I let him kill me now. So just trust in me, love, believe in me, I need you to. I do, she whispered. Good, don't worry Hermione, I'll be okay. He threw a glance to Ron before looking at her once more, be okay. And I promise you this, you and I will always be inseparable. She gave him a watery smile and he moved forward and placed a light on her lips. After he pulled back, they stared into each other's eyes with love and adoration until Harry heard a noise to his left. Looking over, he saw Ron with his head down. Are you all right? Hermione asked before he could. The redhead nodded, a scant second before they heard a small sniff. Ron? Harry asked, giving his mate a worried look. The other boy was quiet for a minute before finally speaking. That was just so bloody beautiful, Harry. He blubbered with another large sniffle. Harry couldn't help it, he laughed. The Great Hall was abuzz with loud, boisterous conversation as each of the houses rejoiced over the end of exams. Several 7th years recapped the horrors of the NEWTs to an audience of captive 5th and 6th years, while other people pigged out on the elaborate feast. So then, Ron said to a wide-eyed 6th year named Anthony Balford, they make you take off all of your clothes and they throw stones at you. You know, to see if you can get your protective shields up soon enough. If you can't, then they soak you down with a hose, give you 30 lashes and do it all over again. Hermione shook her head and threw her boyfriend an annoyed look. Do you believe him? Harry laughed. The question is, does he? Well, if he does, then he deserves the terror. I can't believe anyone would be basic enough to listen to a word Ron says anyway, she responded while selecting a piece of chicken. I heard that, Ron said, looking at the dark-haired girl and giving a distracted wave to Anthony, who then rushed off to tell his fellow classmates about the new exam procedure. I know, she retorted with a smug look. Ron rolled his eyes before making a face. They're at it again, he grunted, tearing into a roll with added vigor. Who? Harry asked. The redhead made a jabbing motion behind him with his thumb. Turning, Harry saw Ginny sitting at the Slytherin table, practically DD on Draco Malfoy like a second robe. Gross, Hermione commented with a disdainful look. There is such a thing as class, you know. Yeah, well, there's also such a thing as tact, Neville stated, speaking for the first time since they got to the Great Hall. What is that supposed to mean? Harry asked with a frown. It means this is all your fault, that's what it means. If you had been truthful with her instead of leading her on while you ran around with some dodgy backstabber who was supposed to be her friend, she would have never gotten involved with someone like him, the other boy responded angrily. The people around the two stared at him in shock for a minute before turning to Harry with expectant looks. See here, Neville, say what you want to about me, but leave Hermione out of this. Besides, how does saying, I only want to be friends, and I don't feel the same way about you anymore, constitute leading her on? Harry replied hotly. You say that, but then you still act all friendly with her. That's because I wanted to be friends. The other boy cried. Hermione placed a hand lightly on his forearm as a signal to keep it down. Sorry, he muttered before glaring at Neville. I wasn't leading her on. Neville scoffed. You know what you did. He threw Hermione a contemptuous look, and so does she. I told you to leave her out of this, Harry ground out. Look you guys, Dean interrupted, this is supposed to be a celebration, it's no time to kick off. Yeah, chimed Seamus, we're done with NEWTs, you're supposed to be happy Neville. How can I be happy when Ginny's so miserable, all because of what they did to her, he replied giving the other boy a frown. He looked back at Harry, look just because you're Harry Potter doesn't mean you can treat people like crap. It also doesn't mean you can bloody well dictate what I say and what I don't. Regardless of your restrictions, she knows what she is as well as I do, whether I say it or not I just choose to say it. You know, though there may be some people in this school who are scared of you I'm not one of them, he stated with a fierce glower. Hermione, Ron, Dean and Seamus shared anxious looks as Harry sat quietly, intently watching the other boy. Look Neville, he said a few minutes later in a tone that he usually reserved for Malfoy. Just because you were too much of a bloody Nancy boy to have been man enough to tell Ginny what you felt for her before she started dating Malfoy doesn't mean that gives you free rein to run around here like some bleedin' saint. Don't be mad at me because you wanted what I had, but it didn't want you. Oh, and as for what you think that Hermione may or may not be, he leaned forward on the table, it would be best if you kept that to yourself. You know, I never wanted or deserved anyone's fear until now. He raised his wand and placed it discreetly at the other boy's neck, looking him directly in the eyes he finished in a steely tone. So what I want you to do is give it a go. Tell me what you think she is, show me how brave you are, and I'll show you how misplaced that bravery was. Harry, Hermione stated anxiously looking around the hall. Luckily, people were so wrapped up in celebrating that everyone short of the few people at their section of table remained oblivious to the dangerous situation brewing between the two older boys. Please Harry, she whispered touching his arm. Come on mate, Ron hissed, we have less than a week. Getting expelled and sent to Azkaban less than a week before you graduate is just bloody stupid. Hell if you were going to do that you could have done it first year, or at least last week and saved yourself the headache of taking the NEWT. Yeah, besides, Neville was just kidding, nervously added Seamus, right Neville? The two boys continued to stare at one another seemingly ignoring the comments around them, until Neville's gaze wavered. Right, he muttered, looking down at the table. Giving a nod, Harry lowered his wand and took a seat. As soon as he did Neville stood from the table and stormed out of the hall. Harry watched the retreating back of a bloke that he used to call his mate, before running an agitated hand through his hair. You didn't need to do that you know, Hermione said from next to him. He shook his head but didn't respond. He was just venting Harry, he didn't mean it. Just give him a little while. He rolled his eyes, that's what you said about Ginny, he commented throwing his girlfriend a look. So does this mean for graduation we should be on to look out for a Neville pansy match? Dean snorted into his potatoes, Hermione rolled her eyes and Ron and Seamus groaned. Blimey, mate. The red-haired boy exclaimed, I was trying to eat. Now not only do I have to put up with seeing my sister snog Malfoy, but I get to add an image of Neville snogging Pansy to it too. Okay, that's a mental image I did not need, Hermione commented dryly, giving a small shudder. Could we please talk about something else, added Seamus. Anything else, chimed a pale-looking Ron. For the first time since his exchange with Neville, Harry cracked a smile. And here I thought Ron was the only drama queen in our midst. Hey, I am not a queen. The red-headed boy exclaimed, blushing when several students turned and looked at him. Of course you're not Ronald, Hermione stated giving him a light pat on the arm. You're a plumperdink, she finished with an impish grin. He threw Harry an arrested look, you told her. His mate blushed and turned back too. His food. Don't blame Harry, Hermione stated over the laughter of the people who had overheard the nickname. I had to force it out of him. I don't care I can't believe you told her. I would have never let Luna force anything out of me about you, Ron responded still frowning. I couldn't help it, Harry gave Ron a roughish grin, you'd be surprised what she can force out of me mate. Hermione punched him in the arm while the boys at the table chortled at the implications. Righto mate, Ron said with a wide grin, then you're forgiven. Hermione threw a roll at him, you pig. What? He was cut off as Dumbledore called all attention to the front of the hall. The five of them shared confused looks before turning to watch the headmaster. Now I know that I usually reserve these long talks for the beginning of the year, however we can all do with a bit of spontaneity now and again, he gave Harry an amused look and the younger wizard blushed. As you all know, this year's NEWTs are over, applause and whistles rang out. To my dear 7th years, you have less than one more week in our hallowed halls before you are released into the wizarding world. The usual routine is that the students enjoy their last moments as students, uninterrupted by classes or lectures. Spending 4 free days together completely unencumbered, to have some last and hopefully profound moments with your friends before moving into adult life. He gave a small smile. However, this year there will be a slight change in plans. In 3 days hence your parents will arrive. A ripple of groans and exclamations of dismay rang out from the 7th years. I realize that this may be inconvenient for you, but I do hope that my reason for doing so will get at least, he threw an amused glance to the Slytherin table, some of you, to forgive me. Earlier this month we had a bit of a disturbance which caused several things to be moved, cancelled or postponed. Harry and Ron threw Hermione curious looks, but she responded with a baffled expression and a small hitch of her shoulders. Since that small disruption is no longer a factor, I have decided that the things that were postponed shall now be rescheduled. At this statement the students began to whisper excitedly. So in order to avoid having such a glorious cup go to waste, I am pleased to announce that this year and for the first time in Hogwarts history we will be having a Quidditch match after exams. Ravenclaw, Gryffindor, Dumbledore gave small smile to both tables. I truly hope that you're ready. I'd hate for you to embarrass yourselves in front of your families. The Great Hall was in an uproar. Harry looked at Hermione with a shocked expression. The Quidditch game between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor was back on. And the families were going to be there to watch. Wow, Hermione said with a light shake of the head, my dad's going to have a conniption. Harry and Ron both nodded, still too stunned to actually form words. As people began to come over to congratulate them, the two boys slowly came out of their stupor. Isn't it just wonderful, Ronald? Luna said from the spot she had taken next to her boyfriend. Your parents are going to get to watch you play a real game. She frowned. I just hope that the Fall Trust leaves Ginny before your mum and dad get here or things won't be pretty. Hermione frowned. What in the world is a Fall Trust? Oh, it's a type of leech that creeps into your ear while you're sleeping and takes over your mind. It makes you do the strangest things. Once my dad did an interview with a woman who was possessed by one and she just got up and jumped out of the window right in the middle of it, she replied in a musical tone. What? WHW, was she hurt? The brunette exclaimed with a worried look. Oh, not at all, the blonde replied with a serene smile. In fact, right after she landed she just walked away. Without a scratch? Harry inquired. Luna nodded her head. She didn't have to see a healer or anything? Asked Ron, taken aback. Nope, the other girl replied. Luna? Hermione asked, arching a brow. Just what floor was this interview on? The blonde gave her a curious look. Why, the first floor, of course. Hermione smirked. Of course. Harry and Ron both smacked themselves on the head before laughing. How could they not have thought of that? Grinning and now feeling more like his old self since before his run-in with Neville, Harry stood and called his team over. They needed to discuss practice and strategy. Hermione threw an annoyed look to her boyfriend as he shifted anxiously next to her once more. Relax, will you? She hissed, looking around at the other students. Everyone was standing in the front of the school waiting for the carriages carrying the families to pull in. They were supposed to be arriving sometime within the next couple of minutes. How am I supposed to relax? He questioned in a disgruntled tone. In the next 2 minutes your mum and dad are going to be here. Harry looked at his girlfriend. So not only am I going to come face to face with your parents for the first time since we started dating, but I also have to deal with the fact that you hadn't even bothered to tell them about us. Hermione blushed and winced. Right, well, I just didn't want to have to put up with my mum. What does your mum have to do with you hiding our relationship? I wasn't hiding it, I was keeping it private. And as for my mum, she has everything to do with it. When Harry arched a brow as a silent signal for her to continue, Hermione groaned. Well, you see, my mum has been saying that we fancied each other since before we were ready to admit it ourselves. In fact, she was completely sure that we were going to be together. So when she finds out that we're dating, then I'm certain she's going to gloat so much that it'll be virtually impossible to deal with. Harry scoffed. Let me get this straight, you keep this a secret from your mum, because you didn't want to admit you were wrong. The brunette turned a bright red. Well, not really. Then what, really? I kept this a secret because, she winced, because I didn't want to let her know she was right. He rolled his eyes. Same bleedin' thing Hermione, and you know it, he responded with a light shake of the head and a quick scan for the carriages once more. Brilliant, just bloody brilliant. So now not only do I have to deal with your parents' reactions to us, I also have to deal with the Weasleys' reactions as well. He gave her a peeved look. Thanks. You're welcome, Hermione joked, giving a small grimace when he glowered at her. I'm sorry Harry, I really am, but I'll be there with you for both and hopefully we'll make it out with most of our body parts intact. Gee, I feel so much better, he muttered with a chuckle. Hermione got on her toes and gave him a light on the lips and a wide smile. It'll work out, you'll see. Harry sighed. Yeah, I don't know, I really hope the Weasleys are still speaking to me. I'm positive they are. Well, I suppose one of should be positive, since I'm defiantly not. I mean, sure Ron took it well, but that was before Ginny started dating Malfoy. What if the whole family bloody well hates me? After all, I couldn't blame them if they did, now could I? He inquired anxiously. Hermione turned him to face her and rested a cool hand on his warm cheek, offering a smile. It'll be okay, you're like family to the Weasleys. That's just it, I'm like family. Ginny is family, he sighed. Hermione gave a surprised look to Ron as he placed a hand on Harry's shoulder. Don't worry mate, I know my mum and dad, it'll work out. Yeah, if anything they'll probably just be mad at me, his girlfriend offered with a smile. I don't want that either, Harry replied frowning. I wouldn't be able to stand it if they got mad at you, but we're fine with me. After all, I was the one that was supposed to be dating Ginny, not you, and the last thing I need is you getting blamed like Ron did. This is my fault, not anyone else's. Actually Harry, Luna chimed in her normal musical tone, it's no one's fault. Really, so what magical creature caused this then? The dark-haired boy asked with a harassed look. She gave a small frown. Well, I wouldn't exactly call love a magical creature, though when you do find it, it is like the most wonderfully magical feeling ever, isn't it? Luna finished with a tranquil smile and a thoughtful look. Hermione and Ron gave her surprised looks. That had not been the answer they were expecting. Yes Luna, Harry replied after a moment of stunned silence, offering her a small smile. Yes it is. She grinned back, then leaning against her amused-looking boyfriend looked reflectively up at the sky. It's also quite powerful. Face it, you two didn't have any more of a chance than Ronald and I did. She glanced back at him one more. It'll work out Harry, you'll see. Harry opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by loud exclamations of excitement. The families were coming. Hermione gave her boyfriend's hand a light squeeze as she searched the incoming carriages anxiously for the familiar faces of her mum and dad. There they are, Harry said after a moment. Following the direction that he was pointing, she saw her mum and dad sitting in a carriage with Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Hermione's eyes widened and she could feel herself beginning to panic. What if they told them already? Harry, she said nervously. He didn't comment but gave her hand a light squeeze. Okay, so, I guess it's now or never, Ron commented, giving them a look. Can we take the never option? Hermione responded with a tense laugh. The redhead rolled his eyes in reply and pushed his mates towards the carriage, which had just come to a halt a few feet away. Harry and Hermione shared nervous looks as they neared the coach. Hermione, Ella Granger exclaimed with a wide grin when she spotted her daughter. Mum, Hermione yelled, returning the smile and rushing the rest of the way forward. She and Harry reached them just in time for him to help Ella out of the coach. Thank you Harry, Mrs. Granger said with a smile, just before pulling the boy into a tight hug. You still look smashing, she teased merrily. Harry blushed. Thank you. Hey there Harry old chap, how are you? Mr. Granger asked, hopping down from the carriage as his wife hugged his daughter. I'm fine sir, Harry responded, shaking the older man's outstretched hand. Dan nodded and then gave a curious look back to their transportation as he pulled his daughter into a loose hug. Do these things always pull themselves? Harry grinned. Actually they don't pull themselves. At the two parents' surprised looks he elaborated. You see, they're pulled by a couple of, well, I guess you could call them, magical horses. They're called Thestrals. Really? Ella asked in a surprised tone before looking once more at the seemingly empty space in front of the coach. Yes, really, Harry responded with a jovial smile before going forward and petting the nose of one of the creatures. You're touching it. Mrs. Granger inquired, examining the space where the dark-haired boy's hand seemed to be touching something. Yep, you know you can. Too, he replied with a wink. Really? She asked. At his nod she held up her hand. Harry took her wrist and guided it to the creature's neck, moving it in slow stroking motions. See. Oh my gosh. Dan, there's something there. She exclaimed, turning and looking at her husband with an excited look. I can't believe this, she finished in an awestruck tone as she continued to rub the creature's neck. Be careful honey, you don't know how that thing's reacting to you, Dan warned with a frown. Harry and Hermione shared a look. Don't worry sir, he said with a small smile, he's perfectly calm. Aren't you? He asked, scratching the thestral under its chin. Wait, Dan commented, coming forward, you can see it. Harry blushed. Yes. How? Dad, let's not get into that, okay? Hermione asked, shooting her boyfriend a look. Harry smiled at her and gave a shrug. That's all right Hermione, he looked back at Mr. Granger. Well, you see they're not invisible. It's just that only certain people can see them. What kind of people? Ella inquired with a frown. Harry blushed once more and looked at the ground, only people who have seen death. Ella and Dan Granger stood in stunned silence. So Dad, Hermione commented after a minute, did you hear? Hear what pumpkin? Mr. Granger asked, looking back at his daughter. That they're going to be having a real Quidditch game while you guys are here. Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw, she answered smiling. Oh yes, I heard. Arthur Weasley mentioned it to me on the ride up. Can't wait to see you in action Harry, he commented, giving the dark-haired boy a grin and wink. Hey, speaking of the Weasleys, where did they go? He looked around for the other couple. They're over there dear, his wife answered, pointing to his far right. In the distance the Weasley family, minus Ginny, was gathered around talking and joking with one another. The twins seemed to be teasing Ron and Luna to no end, if their big red faces were any indication, while Mr. and Mrs. Weasley just stood back and watched the scene with contented smiles. Let's head over then, Dan said, turning. When he made a step in that direction his daughter grabbed his hand. Daddy, I don't think we should, she stated nervously. Why pumpkin? Is everything all right? Well, kind of. Did you and Ron have a fight? Her mum asked with a frown. Well, you see, Ron and I kind of broke up a while ago. So let me guess, you two weren't able to go back to being friends? Ella inquired with a sympathetic look. Well, it's not exactly that, she continued when they gave her confused looks. You see, Ron and I are still friends, best mates really. Actually, his new girlfriend Luna and you remember Luna, don't you? From Christmas. Well, we get along great too. We often all just hang out and study together. I'm sorry pumpkin, but I don't understand, her dad said with a frown. What's the problem then? Hermione and Harry shared a look. The problem isn't my relationship with Ron, it's my relationship with Ginny, she replied, biting her lip. Her mum's eyes flicked between the two teens before setting on her daughter. What's wrong with you and Ginny? You see. Hermione took a deep breath and fidgeted with her hands. Well, the problem with Ginny and I, is me, Harry stated, stepping forward. Looking at the older couple he took a deep breath before reaching out and clasping Hermione's hand in his own. I broke up with Ginny to be with Hermione and she wasn't too happy about it, he finished with a worried look. You mean, you two? Dan said, looking between the two teens. Harry and Hermione looked at each other once more before blushing and nodding. Ella Granger shook her head and scoffed. Well, it's about bloody time. Harry threw her a surprised look while Hermione's blush deepened. How long? She asked, looking between the two. Almost 5 months, Harry answered, wincing when the older woman frowned. Ella directed her displeased gaze at her daughter. And you didn't tell me? How could you not tell me, Hermione? I'm sorry Mum, I just didn't know how. Her mum snorted. Please, the only thing you don't know how to do is admit when you're wrong. I wonder where she gets it, Mr. Granger grumbled. What was that, Dan? Ella asked, rounding on her husband. He gave her a grin. What was what, dear? What you said. Sorry, I don't remember what I said. But then again, like you said, I am getting a bit senile in my old age, he responded with a smug look. She poked him in the shoulder. I'm going to remember that lippy comment later, you know. Good dear, one of us has to. The two teens chuckled at the conversation before sobering somewhat as the Weasleys began to head in their direction on their way to the school. "I'm sure it'll be all right, Harry," Hermione whispered. "Arthur, Molly," Ella said with a smile, "there you are. We were wondering where you had gone off to." "We were right over there talking to the kids, Mrs. Weasley responded, returning the smile. "Hey there, Ron," Mr. Granger said. "I look forward to seeing you play later." He gave the blonde next to the other boy a kind smile. "Luna, very nice to see you again too, of course." "Thank you," she replied with an uncharacteristic blush. "I can't wait either," Ron answered, "though the person you should really be watching is Harry, he's awesome on the field." Here, said Fred, "best seeker we ever had, Harry was. You could always count on him to find the snitch," added George. "Yeah, it was staying on his broom he had problems with," Fred commented with a wide grin. "But you have to give the guy credit, I've never seen anyone fall with so much style," George finished with an appreciative nod and a wink. "Ha ha," the dark-haired boy commented dryly. "Well, I do look forward to seeing you in action, Harry," said Mr. Weasley. "I've been hearing about how great you are for the past several years. It'll be nice to finally get to see for myself." Harry blushed. Well, thanks sir. I just hope I can live up to what you've heard." "I'm sure you will." Ron, have you seen Ginny?" Mrs. Weasley interrupted, and uncomfortable silence descended upon the group. Not since breakfast," Ron answered after a minute. "I could help you find her," Harry offered, thinking of the Marauders map. The other woman was quiet for a moment before looking up at the sky. "I believe that you've done enough, Harry." "Mrs. Weasley," Hermione started but was cut off as her mum put a hand on her shoulder. "Well, we'll let you guys do what you have to," Ella Granger said with a smile. "We'll just see you guys at lunch before the game." "I don't think so," Molly Weasley replied, looking at the other woman. "I think that this afternoon we should really have a private lunch, you know, she looked at Harry, "family," she turned and walked away. The dark-haired boy snapped his eyes shut as pain coursed through him. "Molly," Arthur Weasley exclaimed, giving his wife a frown and Harry a strained smile before turning to follow her. "She didn't mean it, Harry," Fred said. "Yeah, she's just in a mood," offered George. "She'll get over it," chimed Ron. Harry gave a mirthless smile and shrugged his shoulders. "What does it matter anyway? It's not like she was my mum or anything," he commented tonelessly before turning and walking towards the lake. Hermione turned to rush after him but was forestalled as her mum took her arm. "I'll handle this," she said, but before she could do so her husband placed a hand on her shoulder. "No dear, I will." Harry tossed another leaf onto the sparkling lake water, staring lifelessly at the shining surface. "Hello, Harry," Dan Granger said, taking a seat next to him. "Wow, this place is beautiful. Is that due to magic or does nature get the credit?" Harry didn't respond but instead sat quietly, picking at random blades of grass. "Then again, some people may say that nature is magic," Dan continued after the silence had stretched for a minute. The older man gave a sigh. "Look, Harry, we both know I'm not here to talk about the joys and wonders of nature. I'm not going to say that I know what you're going through, I don't think anyone can. But I will say that whatever it may be, you don't have to go through it alone." The dark-haired boy gave him a sidelong look. "You have Hermione, Ron, his girlfriend Luna, not to mention any of your other friends." He sighed. "Look, I don't really know you well, Harry, so I don't know everyone you have in your life, but I do know you have people there. Not just the ones I mentioned either, you have Ella and I too." Harry scoffed. "For how long?" He looked at the older man. "Until Hermione and I break up, or have our first big fight." "I'm not an idiot, Mr. Granger. I know that any affiliation that I have with any family is only temporary. I'm not really a member, I'm just a guest." Harry gave him a sad look. "My parents are dead gone. They can't be here for me and neither can my godfather, he's dead too. The only people in my life that share my blood would collectively give their right arms for the possibility to shed it and have me out of their lives for good. For the past 7 years the Weasleys have treated me like family, like their 8th son, and now they don't even want to have lunch at the same table as me." First of all, Harry, Molly was the only one who expressed that sentiment. Second, she was just upset. "I'm sure it'll blow over." The dark-haired boy shook his head. "No, it's not, only Molly, it's Mrs. Weasley, the glue that holds the family together. and the closest thing I've had to a mum my whole life," he finished in a hurt whisper. "She'll get over it. And what if she doesn't? What if she never wants to see me again? Do you really think I'll get any more invitations for the holidays then? Or any more birthday presents or anyone who gives a damn about my health or my life short of saving the wizarding world? So you put that little importance on what my daughter feels for you?" Dan asked with a frown. "Does how much she cares about you come into account? Do you think that your life doesn't matter to her? Because it does. Look, Harry, I may not know a lot about you, but I know my pumpkin. The way she talks about you, the way she looks at you, the way she is with you. This last break, I had never seen her act so alive, so happy. You mean a lot to her, a whole lot, and I hate to think her feelings are one-sided." "And no sir, they're not. He licked his lips and looked the older man in the eyes. "I love your daughter, more than anything." Dan arched a brow. "More than Molly Weasley?" Harry chuckled and looked down. "Yes. Good, then pull yourself together, man. Whether you are not still included in the esteemed Weasley family lunches, you have now joined the ranks of the Grangers. A slightly less boisterous but still, if you count my wife, quite mischievous lot. With a penchant for problem solving, getting our way and stubbornness, also with a history of loyalty to those we care about." Mr. Granger grinned and gave a wink. "Welcome to the ranks, my boy. Laundry is every Thursday, but we don't do underwear," he arched a brow, "or windows." Harry laughed. "Good to know. Besides, Harry, if I were you I wouldn't worry," Dan commented, standing and extending a hand to the younger boy, helping him up. "I think my wife likes you better than Hermione anyway, so if things don't work out we might just keep you and throw her back." Harry laughed harder. "I don't think I could let you do that, sir." Mr. Granger gave him a grin and a hearty clap on the back. "Good answer, my boy, good answer." 3 hours later, Harry and Ron walked into the Great Hall together, discussing how brilliantly practice had gone. The game was 2 hours after lunch and the Gryffindor team had never felt more prepared. Just before practice, Harry had an epiphany, and out of nowhere, new ideas for strategies had come to him. Everyone had instantly latched onto the fresh approach and quickly taken to working together like a well-oiled machine on the field. Now Gryffindor had a whole new game plan than they did just yesterday. However, there was one problem. Ginny Weasley the younger witch had decided not to show up for today's practice, so therefore she had no idea what her team would be doing on the pitch. This meant that the reserve chaser Millicent Crawford, who had covered for her today, would have to be the one to play the game this afternoon. A situation that most, if not all, of the team seemed to be quite thrilled about. Then again, Harry thought with a frown, they're not the ones who have to tell Ginny or Mrs. Weasley about the change of plans. "Harry," Hermione called. Hearing her voice, Harry was pulled out of his gloomy thoughts and immediately began to relax a bit. The dark-haired boy quickly scanned the Gryffindor table for his girlfriend, locating her a moment later. He hurried over to join her. However, as he neared and got a better view of the area, his steps faltered. The Grangers were sitting towards the middle of the large table, right next to the Weasleys. In fact, Mr. Weasley and Mr. Granger were involved in what looked to be a light-hearted conversation about something. The dark-haired boy threw a glance back to the entrance, seriously considering turning around. "Harry," Hermione called again, watching him with a confused expression. "Go on, mate, I'm wasting away here," Ron said, giving him a small shove. Harry shook his head and threw a distressed look to Mrs. Weasley, who was watching him with a frown. "I can't." Ron sighed. "Harry, look, I'm sure my mum is probably over it already. Just go on." The dark-haired boy shook his head again, giving one more fleeting glance to the older woman frowning at him from the table. He quickly squeezed past Ron and headed towards the door. "So you're not even going to eat?" his mate asked, following after him. "Harry, we have a huge game in a couple of hours, you can't play well on an empty stomach." Harry threw the other boy a look. "No, Ron, you can't play well on an empty stomach, I can play just fine." When Ron frowned, he sighed. "Look, I'll have Dobby bring me something to the dorm, okay?" "Harry, just leave it, Ron, I'll catch you later," he finished, cutting his friend off and jogging out of the hall. Harry distractedly pushed his mashed potatoes around with a cold drumstick as his mind replayed the events of the day. So this was it, his relationship with the Weasley family was at an end. He sighed and put down the piece of poultry, wiping his hand on a napkin before running it through his hair. It was amazing, really. He had never realized that losing someone living was actually just as painful, if not more, than losing someone who had died. After all, even though he would never get to see his parents or Sirius again, at least he knew they didn't want to leave him. But with the Weasleys, they had made a choice. Harry sighed, sure it was just Mrs. Weasley for now, but how long would it be until the rest of them, with the exception of Ron of course, forgot about him? Harry was pulled out of his depressing thoughts when he heard the portrait door open. Sitting up a bit straighter in his seat, he briefly considered trying to act like nothing was wrong, but nixed that idea almost as swiftly as it came. Hermione knew him better than anyone, so why bother? How was lunch? He asked while still looking down at his own virtually uneaten meal in a last-ditch effort to avoid the topic he knew she would wish to discuss. I've had better. Harry's head snapped up and he stared in shock at Molly Weasley. But I may be a bit biased, since I was usually the one to make it, she continued with a small smile. I hope you don't mind. I got the password from Ron. He and Hermione were sure that this was where you had gone. Harry looked down briefly before giving a small shrug. I don't mind. Good, well, she looked around nervously. I wanted to talk to you, Harry. If I could, I understand if you don't want to, with the way I acted earlier, but. Of course I want to, he interrupted, She gave him a kind smile. I understand. Look, Harry, earlier today I was out of line and I apologize. That's okay, you had every right to be upset. I sure did, but not at you. It was just when I didn't see Ginny there and then I saw you there with Hermione, I blamed the two of you for her absence. She held up a finger when Harry opened his mouth to comment. Just let me say this. Between my two children in this school, I'm pretty well versed on both sides of what's been going on here. I must admit at first I was quite angry to hear about what you two had done behind Ginny's back. Harry bit his lip and looked down. However, as Ron explained, you and Ginny were broken up at the time, so technically you hadn't done anything wrong. Hermione didn't either, Harry interrupted with a frown. Mrs. Weasley made a face. I'm still on the fence about. Why? Because she was supposed to be Ginny's best friend. So, I was supposed to be Ron's, Harry retorted. Besides, Hermione and Ginny were hardly best friends. True, they were mates, but everyone knew that they generally couldn't spend more than a day around one another without arguing at least 5 times and driving everyone within hearing range to distraction. The older woman gave a slight incline of the head. Well, that is true, but they were still mates and Hermione shouldn't have done what she did. Fair enough, conceded Harry, but in that case Ron shouldn't have done what he did, and neither should Luna have. After all, Luna was a member of the DA, and though she and Hermione didn't really hang out, they still considered themselves friends. The dark-haired boy stated before giving her an inquiring look. So I do hope that you got on her for what she did to Hermione, going behind her back to be with your son. Fine, Harry, you've made your point. So you're not mad at Hermione? A little, yes I am, but Ginny's my daughter and as her mother it's my duty to maintain that bit of self-righteous anger. Harry chuckled. I'll give you that. Either way, that's neither here nor there, Mrs. Weasley continued brusquely. What I came up here to say was that I'm sorry, I shouldn't have blamed you for Ginny's recent actions. She shook her head. Ron had told us that lately she's been acting like a bit of a brat, but today we got to see it firsthand. Molly sighed wearily. At first she was happy to see everyone, but when she caught wind of her father and the boys trying to talk to me on your behalf, her demeanor changed. Then when we asked about her relationship with that Malfoy boy, she frowned. Well, that bit of lip that she gave her dad almost had me put her across my knee right there in the Great Hall. I haven't seen her act this way since she was a little girl, she rubbed her temples. And though it would be easy to blame you, both of you, I don't, not anymore. After all, Ginny's almost in her last year of Hogwarts and nearly to her adult life. These temper tantrums just won't do. You should have seen the ruckus she caused when Ron tired to get her to go to Quidditch practice. She shook her head. That's okay, Mrs. Weasley. Speaking of Quidditch. No it isn't, Molly interrupted. I shouldn't have treated you that way. I'm very sorry if I hurt you. You didn't, Harry replied looking out the window. Really? He nodded. So then why did you leave the Great Hall? He looked down and scratched the back of his neck. Okay, so you may have hurt me a bit. Glancing up at her he blushed, or a lot. Oh Harry dear, I regret what I said to you. I've always tried to be like a mother to you. You were, he interrupted, which is why he trailed off with a sad smile. She came forward and gathered him a tight hug. I promise I'll never do anything like that again, ever. I'm so sorry, Harry. They hugged for a few minutes longer before the older woman pulled back and tisked at him for not finishing his food. Then grabbing his arm she led him down the stairs of Hermione's dorm and back towards the Great Hall. Mrs. Weasley, Harry said hesitantly as they made their way down the hall. Yes, dear. About the Quidditch game. She threw him a small smile. Don't worry, Ron already told us. All of you? He asked, wincing. Molly nodded, yes, and she threw a fit, but he had told her to go to practice. That's what happens when you don't do what you should. She then gave a small sigh and regarded Harry curiously. Do you suppose you can answer a question for me, Harry? He raised his brows in surprise and nodded slowly. Since as a mother I should be mad at Hermione for taking Ginny's boyfriend, do I also have to be mad at that Millicent girl for taking her Quidditch spot too? Harry opened his mouth and closed it, clearing his throat. Well, I don't know, maybe. Mrs. Weasley shook her head. You know, being a parent is turning into quite the bothersome job, she stated as they headed into the Great Hall. Do yourself a favor, Harry, don't have kids, have pets. Hermione looked over at her dad and gave a small smile. Dan Granger was practically beside himself with excitement as he looked over the massive pitch filled to the brim with students, teachers and parents. She chuckled as he leaned over the railing and looked down at the substantial drop to the grass below. They put us up here so we can see the game better, Daddy, she said when she saw his surprised look. Now you're more eye level with the action and you don't get as much of a crick in your neck from looking up. Dan responded noncommittally as he studied the layout. Hermione looked at her mum, who just rolled her eyes and smiled. Hear ye, and welcome to the last and most exciting game of the season. Yes, you have the wonderful, talented and brilliant Gryffindors. Against that other team. Hermione rolled her eyes heavenward and chuckled as a chorus of cheers and boos rang out. She could not believe that Dumbledore had actually allowed the Weasley twins to announce the game. All right, we hear ya, yelled Fred. Yeah, keep your knickers on, added George. The other team is Ravenclaw, said Fred in a monotone voice. The Gryffindors laughed at their antics while the Ravenclaws cheered loudly for their house. So let's get this show on the road, called George. Yeah, and let's hope Harry stays on his broom, muttered Fred, causing most of the students to laugh and the parents to look around confused. Here you are, you're clever, George stated. But not enough, threw in Fred. Smart, at certain stuff, hard-working, they'll need to be Quidditch players. I guess we'll see. For Ravenclaw. The Ravenclaw students burst into thunderous applause as their house flew out from the team entrance led by Seeker Cho Chang. The team circled the pitch twice, waving at family and pumping up their house. Okay, enough of that, commented George. Now on to the main event, added Fred. The brave, the bold, the daring, and the strong, Mighty Gryffindors. They finished in unison. Hermione and the rest of the Gryffindor stands went wild as the players flew into the pitch led by Harry. The Gryffindor team circled the area evenly spaced out, growling and roaring at the audience, sounding exactly like of a pack of lions headed off to hunt. Hermione grinned, so that was what he wanted those magical animal crackers for. Harry gave her a smile and a wink as he flew past before the team went to their starting positions. A moment later Madame Hooch blew the whistle and the game began. Hermione watched in awe along with her dad as the Gryffindors played as she had never seen them play before. Their speed was lightning fast and their passes were flawless. If she hadn't known any better she may have thought she was watching a professional match. She watched with keen interest as beaters Charlie and Veruca volleyed the two bludgers between them until chasers Millicent and Dean were right on Ravenclaw keeper Phineas McGee, at which time they released them in rapid succession. The Ravenclaw beaters hurried to block the dangerous balls but were only able to successfully guard one. The other went into Phineas at full force, knocking him soundly off of his broom, out of the game and allowing the chasers to simply toss the quaffle into the goal, making Gryffindor first on the scoreboard. Brilliant, exclaimed Fred over the roar of the crowd. Just bleedin' brilliant, added George. Beaters after me own heart. George nodded. I don't know about you, but I feel a tear coming on. When his twin sniffled, Hermione and her mum looked at one another and burst into laughter. Turning back to the game a moment later, she noticed with great amusement that the beaters were guarding the new keeper Taylor Winterbourne like she was the bloody crown princess. "Go Gryffindor!" Dan Granger shouted when Ron blocked his third quaffle, and the rest of the stands quickly joined in. Hermione glanced up at the skies and smiled at Harry, who was watching the game distractedly from above as he searched for the snitch. Realizing that he was on a mission to win the game for his house, she didn't get upset, well, too upset, when he didn't notice her. Instead, she was pulled back down to the action below as Gryffindor scored yet again, its third score in the last 15 minutes, enabling their team with a 40-0 lead over Ravenclaw. Hermione watched with bated breath as Charlie hit a bludger towards Ravenclaw chaser Mike, who instead of moving, just closed his eyes and cringed. The blonde released a sigh of relief when beater Marion Baxter reached him just in time to hit the ball away. However, while this was going on, Veruca took it as her opportunity to knock the bludger towards Taylor, who was just barely guarded by the other Ravenclaw beater Daniel Matherhorn from not only that bludger, but also the one that Charlie had volleyed his way when Marion had hit it back at him. Ravenclaw was so busy cheering their beaters for avoiding the obviously planned attack that they forgot to watch the goal, something that they realized too late when Angela scored another goal for Gryffindor. That's it, it's over," bellowed George. "Absolutely deadly they are, keeping them on the defense so much that they have no time for offense." Hermione grinned as she realized that this was what Harry had meant earlier when he had mentioned that they had a completely new and brilliant strategy. "Did you see that pumpkin?" her dad exclaimed excitedly, not removing his eyes from the game. "I knew this was a great game, but who would have thought?" "Yeah," he finished when Ron blocked another of Ravenclaw's attempts to score. Hermione laughed. "Wow dear, this really is exhilarating, isn't it?" her mum said from her other side. "I can see why you like it so much, but what does Harry do?" "He looks for the snitch, Mum," she answered, looking at the older woman. "It's a little golden ball about the size of a walnut that flies with amazing agility. It changes speed and direction almost instantaneously, and if he can catch it, it ends the game and earns Gryffindor another 150 points." "Really?" Ella asked, frowning when Hermione nodded. "Isn't that a bit unfair then? I mean, if you have 150 points with scoring alone and the other team has 10, then they can steal the win if their, was it Seeker?" She nodded once more. "If their Seeker finds it first." "Yep. Well, that's just bloody stupid," Ella responded, looking back at the game. Hermione smiled at her mum a moment longer before looking up at Harry once more. He looked so good sitting on his broom like that with the light wind ruffling his hair. Hermione gave a sigh, swatting at an insect as it flew by her face. Biting her lip, she stared intently at her boyfriend, willing him to look down at her, if only for a moment. As she swatted away the stupid dragonfly or whatever it was again, she noticed Harry finally look her way. The dark-haired boy smiled and she grinned in return, blowing him a discreet. He blushed before suddenly turning serious. As Harry continued to study her curiously, Hermione gave him a questioning look. Straightening her hair and her robes, she gave him a shrug and mouthed the words, "What's wrong?" But instead of answering, she was surprised when Harry suddenly shot towards her. The crowd began a flurry of excited whispers as Harry swiftly and easily maneuvered his way around a bludger sent towards him by Ravenclaw and two of his own chasers. Hermione's mouth dropped as Harry barely avoided another bludger and continued to barrel towards her full speed, giving a strangled squeak when the bug flew into her mouth. Before she could spit it out, and to her utter shock, Hermione suddenly felt her boyfriend's lips upon her own and his tongue delve into her mouth. "What the hell is Harry doing?" exclaimed Fred. "I don't know," replied George. "I've heard of young love, but this is ridiculous." Hermione's eyes fluttered open when Harry pulled away and she looked at him with a baffled expression. "Harry, what?" Instead of answering, the dark-haired boy just gave her a smile and a wink. Then, placing two fingers in his mouth and before a captive audience, he slowly removed them. There between his fingers and twinkling in the sunlight sat the golden snitch. The Gryffindor stands went crazy. "Wow," breathed Fred. I, sputtered George. "Well, I guess this is a lot better than the way he caught the snitch with his mouth his first year," joked Fred. "Yeah," added George, "that's what I call going out with a bang." "Really? I'd call it going out with a hell of a snog. Personally, I think that's one of the best bangs you can get." His twin nodded in agreement while several of the students sniggered. "Is that, how you're supposed to catch it?" Ella asked with a bewildered look. The two teens blushed profusely. No mum, Hermione answered over the noise of the crowd. I can honestly say that's never happened before and will probably never happen again. Good, grumbled her dad, I was really enjoying the game till then. Sorry sir, Harry responded still blushing. I just didn't want her to choke. So, yeah, he nervously ran the hand with the snitch through his hair. I've got to go. Hermione laughed as her boyfriend flew off to join the rest of the team who were circling the pitch and throwing animal crackers down to the fans. She laughed even more as her mum and dad both caught several and proceeded to have a roaring contest with one another. Wow, that had been one hell of a game. Well, that was certainly interesting, commented her dad several minutes later as they finally made their way out of the stands. Yeah, now I know what you meant when you said Harry was magnificent, her mum joined, with her normal teasing grin back in place. Have to go, head girl duties, Hermione muttered, blushing and hurrying away from her parents. Hermione, wait, someone called. As she came to a halt, Fred and George Weasley quickly flanked her. Hermione groaned. Great game, huh? Asked George. I know, I've never seen anything like it, answered Fred. Yeah, too bad Harry's not around for another year or two. I know, with plays like that Gryffindor would never lose. Yeah, Hermione said, speeding her pace a bit when she caught sight of her mum in the crowd. So anyway, that's not what we stopped you for, stated Fred. Yeah, we kind of need your help, said George. Really? Hermione frowned. With what? I had a new prototype for Weasley Wizard Wheezes. It was a magical ring. Yeah, but he lost it shortly after we got here. It still has a few kinks to work out. So we're worried some poor sod's going to find it and end up missing a body part. Hermione cringed. Okay, well, what can I do to help? The twins grinned. Thanks Hermione, you're tops, said George. Yeah, we knew we could count on you, added Fred. We just need you to do one thing. Very simple, really. Okay, what? She asked, halting and looking between the two. Just look at me, said Fred. Hermione turned to face him. And say added George. Giving them both glares, she promptly elbowed George in the stomach and stomped on Fred's foot before storming off. As Hermione pushed her way through the crowd and back into the school, she did her best to tune out the sound of the twins' laughter, especially when her mother joined in. Hermione fiddled anxiously with her sleeves as the students got ready to walk out of the school courtyard into the lake where the graduation ceremony would be taking place. Cut it out, Hermione, you're making me nervous, Ron hissed from next to her. Then stop watching me, you get, she responded, throwing him an aggravated look. How can I? You're right in my bloody line of sight, and if you adjust that stupid cone on your head one more time, then I'm going to go bleedin' mental. She looked at him and smirked before once again adjusting her small black hat. When Ron growled, Harry stepped in. Look, you guys, we're almost done, so give it a rest, will you? He whispered, looking around the crowded area. You guys only have one more day with the hats anyway, so Ron, come on and give her a break. You know as well as I do it takes a lot of maneuvering to get these stupid things to look right. He finished adjusting the cone on his head also. I feel like a ruddy elf with this thing on. Ron gave him a curious look. Elves don't wear these kinds of hats. Harry rolled his eyes. You know what I mean. Grudgingly the redhead nodded in agreement. Prat, he commented. Following his gaze, Harry and Hermione noticed that he was glaring at Malfoy. Don't worry, Ron, Hermione said, touching his arm lightly. Whatever game they're at, it'll be over when he graduates. I still can't believe he's graduating, muttered Harry. His mates nodded in agreement as the blonde Slytherin pushed one of his cronies into the other because they had accidentally brushed his robes. All right everyone, Professor McGonagall called, coming into the courtyard. It is now time, please get into order, she clapped several times. Hurry, we don't have a moment to waste, everyone is waiting. Hermione gave Ron a quick hug and Harry a swift before hurrying to her spot between Slytherin's Gregory Goyle and Daphne Greengrass, ignoring their dirty looks. When the professor gave the signal, the group proceeded out into the bright sun, along the grassy knoll, and past their families to the seats waiting for them. Hermione smiled and took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh, crisp morning air. As she made her way forward, she waved happily at her mum and dad, who were grinning widely from the sidelines. Ella Granger was practically glowing as she watched her only child proceed past in her little hat and huge robes. When they made it to the cluster of chairs designated for the graduates, Hermione broke away from the group and continued to the front with Zack Smith. Together they stood patiently next to the pond waiting for the signal to proceed. The brunette smiled and threw an excited look to her parents when a bridge materialized out of water and the professor walked on it to the floating platform located in the middle of the lake. The other teachers along with the headmaster were all already situated on the area with some wearing looks of exhilaration, like Professors Hagrid and Sprout, and others wearing looks of boredom, like Snape and Cypher. Ella and Dan Granger, along with several other Muggle parents, were wearing expressions of total shock at the materialization of the bridge. Hermione chuckled when her dad wiped his eyes and squinted as if to check what he was seeing. Turning forward once more, she too gave an astounded look when Professor McGonagall placed a stool at the front of the stage. A surprised murmur rippled through the students as the professor grabbed an old floppy-brimmed hat and placed it on the stool. Silence reigned when it began to sing. In times of old, when I was new, and Hogwarts barely started, the founders of our noble school thought never to be parted. Together we will build and teach. The four good friends decided. And never did they dream that they might someday be divided. Such good friends I'd never seen. So how could it go wrong? But wrong it went, and that way it stayed. For what was much too long. However, now I'm pleased to see a bond is newly forming. But more must be done to speed things up. Though some aren't quite as charming. In times of strife and great unease, we have a journey to take. Not of leisure, not of rest, but of the highest of stakes. So my dear houses, 'tis you I beseech, to look amongst your lot. Take the time to band together, and use friendships once forgot. For the road ahead brings rocky times, which will be hard to scale, if you do not take heed to my warning, and let unity prevail. Come together as a school, as you were meant to be. Make this class the very start for all around to see, that 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, 4 does not this equal. But all these numbers make only one of unity with no sequel. Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, Gryffindor. 4 houses you are no longer. For now you are just alumni of Hogwarts. A house that is much stronger. So too, those out there that to look to harm. I warn you now to run. For the mighty alumni of Hogwarts will triumph. And they'll do it all as one. For over a minute after the last note rang, silence prevailed until the graduating class minus the Slytherins and led by Ron Weasley, began to clap, first hesitantly then enthusiastically. Most of the families quickly joined in and thunderous applause reigned for the next several minutes. When Professor McGonagall removed the hat and placed it on a seat of honor next to the Hogwarts professors, Hermione smiled. A moment later the older woman made a small motion with her hand and the head boy and head girl quickly made their way over the bridge and to the stage, taking seats just in front of the professors as Headmaster Dumbledore took the podium. Hello one and all, I'm very pleased that you could be here to join us for this year's graduation ceremony. There are a lot of bright, he threw a glance to Hermione, and mischievous, he looked at Harry and Ron, students in this year's graduating class that I know myself and the staff will miss upon their departure. Several of the students smiled, but it is on to bigger and better things they go. Their futures await and I, at least, am not at all interested in taking that from them. However, others may not be so considerate. His gaze scanned the crowd. Over the next year or so, hopefully no more, Hermione saw Harry fidget as several people turned to look at him. Things may get a bit harder for some of you to handle. Nonetheless, I am sure that all if not most of you will have no problem doing what is asked of you. Your time at Hogwarts as a whole has been filled with adventures to get you ready for what is to come. He smiled softly. Mountain trolls, basilisks, dementors, wizarding tournaments with dragons, and even an attack on our very own grounds by Voldemort himself. A murmur rippled through the crowd at the mention of he who must not be named's name. Hermione took a deep breath and looked at her boyfriend. She had the overwhelming feeling that most of Dumbledore's speech was for him. Harry was staring intently at the headmaster, a small frown marring his handsome features. Feeling her gaze upon him, his eyes flicked to hers and Hermione offered him a minuscule smile. The dark-haired boy returned it with one of his own before directing his gaze back to the headmaster, who had once again begun to speak as the conversation died down. Keep in mind that though times may get hard and you may lose ones you love, if you haven't already, there is still a brighter day ahead. A future on the horizon that I know you will not only one day experience but also deserve. So no matter how hard it gets, How impossible or imposing the task seems to be, you will make it though. You will triumph because you have gifts, talents that Voldemort, a lower ripple went through this time, does not. You see Voldemort, lower still, does not understand you, how you fight or what it truly is that you fight for. And it is this lack of understanding, this lack of perceptions that will ultimately be his downfall and your upsurge. So when that day comes, when that time is here and Voldemort is breathing down your neck, Hermione gave a subtle smile at the silence that greeted Voldemort's name this time around, knowing that whatever his point Dumbledore had made it. Don't fear him, don't cower before the self-proclaimed Dark Lord, in terror. Stand before him as the wizard you are and the man that you have become and show him that for all his talk of his infinite powers and all his wishes for destruction there is one power more unbounded than he has ever possessed and more potent than he has ever known. And that power is good old-fashioned love. He smiled at Harry, for a moment longer before pulling his gaze away and scanning the audience. I also wish for you all to be aware that the words I have spoken, though they did put him on the spot, were not just for Harry. He gave a subtle smile, they are for you all. Voldemort seeks to ruin, to destroy and to invoke fear and panic into you all. Tear to shreds your beliefs and your faith in mankind. What I want to say to each and every one of you, he eyes momentarily paused on the Slytherins, is that no matter what happens in the days and weeks to come, you are loved and that love has no boundaries, no limits, you will always be alumni of Hogwarts and welcome here be it to seek refuge from Voldemort himself, or just from overzealous parents with twisted views and dangerous whims. Hermione's mouth dropped a bit and she flicked a glance to Draco Malfoy who shifted uncomfortably in his seat, an unreadable expression flashing across his face. She then hazarded a look at Narcissa and Lucius Malfoy, the latter's face was a blotchy red, his fingers curled roughly around the head of his silver walking stick. Hermione put a hand over her mouth to stifle the giggle that wanted to erupt, turning her attention back to the headmaster, who was finishing up his speech. And they will not. He sighed, so now that my long-winded drabble is out of the way, what do you say we head on to less heavy things and the reason for this wonderful celebration? If the head girl and head boy will come over to assist, then may the graduation ceremony commence. He gave a wide grin and the audience was pulled out of their stupor caused by his speech and into a seemingly rehearsed applause. Professor McGonagall stood once more, unrolling a large parchment as the students stood from their seats and proceeded single file to the water bridge. Abbott, Hannah, Professor McGonagall called in a clear, concise voice. A young woman, somewhat resembling the first year from 7 years past, strode confidently across the water bridge, a large smile on her face as bright eyes scanned the crowd. Two people that Hermione assumed to be the Hufflepuff girls' parents stood from the crowd clapping loudly and grinning madly. Ms. Abbott has passed her NEWTs with grades qualifying her for jobs in both the Muggle-Worthy Excuse Committee and the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad. Each positions being located high on Ms. Abbott's potential job list. Headmaster Dumbledore announced with a smile. Congratulations Ms. Abbott and job well done. Hannah nodded excitedly to the headmaster and taking his hand she shook it enthusiastically before turning to Professor McGonagall. The older witch nodded at the younger one, accepting a roll of parchment containing her certifications from Zach while Hermione stepped forward and removed the small cone from atop Hannah's head. After the hat was removed, she then turned and faced Headmaster Dumbledore once more. He then took the time to place a brand new witch's hat upon her head and pointed his wand at the Hufflepuff crest on her. With a small whoosh, the insignia spun, coming to a halt a moment later, now the crest for Hogwarts as a whole instead of just her house. Hannah gave one last wide smile to the professor, waving her certifications for the two previously mentioned positions at her parents. She practically skipped off of the platform. Bones, Susan, Professor McGonagall called as soon as Hannah headed for the exit bridge. Susan Bones, looking just as excited as her best friend, hurried onto the stage, her hair flying behind her in her rush and stumbling somewhat on her robes. She gave an embarrassed smile to the crowd before coming to a halt in front of the headmaster. Ms. Bones has passed her NEWTs with grades qualifying her for jobs in the Muggle-Worthy Excuse Committee, the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad and the Improper Use of Magic Office. Each position, like her friends, he gave her a smile as Susan's flush rose once more, being located high on Ms. Bones's potential job list. Congratulations Ms. Bones and job well done. Thank you, headmaster, she mumbled with a smile before turning to Professor McGonagall for her certifications. The ceremony continued in the same fashion with Terry Boot following Susan and Mandy Brocklehurst following him. Harry gave a large smile when his girlfriend's name was called. Wincing slightly as though she had gone under the impression that handling cone hats had exempted her from being put on the spot like everyone else, Hermione hesitantly stepped from the side of the professor and approached Headmaster Dumbledore. The older man gave a jovial smile at her obvious discomfort before turning slightly to face the crowd. Normally this is the part where, as you've seen, I list the jobs that the student has qualified for. He gave Hermione a look. However, with Ms. Granger, I find myself unable to complete this task. A chorus of talking rose from the crowd and the students shared mystified looks. Hermione's panicked gaze flew to Harry and he offered her his most comforting smile, though he too was at a loss as to what was going on. Now do not fret, he said, catching the dark-haired witch's bewildered look. For you see, this lack of list is not due to the fact that Mrs. Granger did not qualify for any jobs, but rather is due more to the fact that she was overqualified. Several people chuckled while Hermione's mouth dropped. I am proud to say that for the first time in a very, very long time, we've had a student do so well on their NEWTs that they've meet the criteria for every position from Ministry Janitor, he grinned, to Minister of Magic. Most of the audience and students laughed and Hermione's blush intensified as she put one dainty hand over her mouth in shock. A very hearty and much-deserved congratulations, Ms. Granger, the headmaster said, removing her cone-shaped hat and replacing it with her new one. I hope you do not mind if we don't have your certificates here. However, I believe that it is imperative to be able to continue on with the ceremony with as little disruption as possible. And having to have our dear Professor McGonagall take leave to be patched up by Madame Pomfrey due to the strain of lifting such a sizable object would be most detrimental to what we are trying to accomplish. Hermione joined in on the laughter at this comment. So once more, kudos, Ms. Granger, he turned her pin to the Hogwarts crest, and I am most proud to be able to call you Hogwarts alumni. Hermione smiled at the headmaster, dipping her head slightly. She took a step back to her original place. Looking out at the audience, she waved to her parents and the Weasleys, who were all clapping excitedly. Harry grinned as he caught sight of Ella Granger dabbing tears from her eyes, an intensely happy and contented expression on her face as she watched her baby graduate. A small pain went through his heart as he realized that he had no one to look at him that way. Quickly brushing off the feeling and mentally admonishing himself for stealing Hermione's moment, even if it was only internally, he looked back at his girlfriend. When their gazes connected, he gave her a mock bow, and when she laughed he mouthed the words, "I love you," and she responded in kind. Greengrass, Daphne, Professor McGonagall called a moment later when the noise quieted down somewhat. The dark-haired Slytherin approached the platform and Harry allowed his mind to wander. As he continuously moved forward with the line, automatically clapping for those he knew like Neville, though he was still a bit peeved at him, Ernie Macmillan and the Potter twins. He replayed Dumbledore's speech in his head. He really didn't know if he should be upset with the headmaster for putting him in the spotlight once again, or relieved that he had noticed Harry's distress. Since hearing the Sorting Hats song, the dark-haired boy had found himself lost in thought over the danger ahead and how, if at all, he could protect the members of his graduating class from having to suffer as he had. Potter, Harry. He shifted, his brows furrowed. Sure, he had love, and Dumbledore says it's enough. It was enough to save him as a child, but it wasn't enough to stop Voldemort from resurrecting himself that night in the graveyard. It wasn't enough to save Sirius. Potter, Harry. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Maybe Dumbledore was right. With them fighting together they would be able to prevail. The problem was that even though, technically, the fight did concern the whole wizarding community, Harry couldn't help but feel that the fight was his and only his to have. And that it was between him and Voldemort, no one else. So it was be his fault if Harry. His thoughts were cut off when he was nudged to the side. His startled gaze flew to his right where Dean Thomas was staring at him. Mate, they're calling you, you're up, go. He hissed. Mentally cursing, he looked up and noticed every eye trained on him. Several of the Slytherins chortled in amusement while Hermione regarded him worriedly. Flashing her a quick smile and giving everyone else an embarrassed wave, he hurried up the platform, coming to a halt in front of the headmaster. Sorry, sir, he mumbled with a weak smile. No apologies necessary, Harry. it's understandable you'd have a few things on your mind." He gave the dark-haired boy a meaningful look. Harry flushed more, once again unnerved by how uncanny Dumbledore's sense of perception seemed to be. "Mr. Potter," an eerie silence reigned at the mention of his name by the headmaster, "has passed his NEWTs with grades qualifying him for jobs in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, including the Magical Law Enforcement Squad, and is an Auror." He gave Harry a meaningful look. "Mr. Potter has also qualified for several positions in the Department of Mysteries and a much coveted but hardly retained position as the new Defense Against Dark Arts professor here at Hogwarts." Several surprised exclamations flew through the crowd and students. Harry stared at the headmaster in shock for a moment before hazarding a glance at Professor Snape. He almost smiled at the disdainful look on the greasy-haired Mont's face and the distinct tick in his right eye. "The position will remain open for as long as Mr. Potter wishes to mull over his options," continued Dumbledore, "with our esteemed Professor Snape filling the opening either temporary or permanently, until which time Mr. Potter has decided." Was he imagining it, or did Professor Snape just snarl? Harry fought a laugh. "I hope, Mr. Potter, that you will consider my offer. I'm sure that with you in the lead we will be able to actually retain a defense professor for more than 1 year at a time." He gave a kind smile, seemingly oblivious to the dark glare Snape was sending his way. "Once more my utmost congratulations, Mr. Potter. You are more than ready for what the world has in store for you, even if you don't realize it yet." As a smiling Professor McGonagall handed him his roll of parchment containing his certifications, Harry gave a surprised look at the pride that shone through in her eyes. When Hermione stepped forward and removed the small cone from his head, he gave a small smile when her fingers purposefully grazed the back of his neck in a comforting, feather-light caress. He then turned and faced Headmaster Dumbledore again, who placed his wizard's hat upon Harry's head and quickly changed his crest to a Hogwarts one. Giving the headmaster a handshake that ended up in more of a half-hug, Harry started to make his way off the platform. He was almost to the bridge when a shrill whistle cut through the fog of his thoughts. Halting, he looked out at the crowd. Almost everyone was on their feet clapping, but he noticed with great amusement that the Weasley twins, and he shook his head and grinned, Ella Granger, were actually standing on their seats cheering. Harry laughed outright when Mrs. Granger let out another ear-piercing whistle that earned her admiring looks from both of the Weasley twins. Seeing his laugh, her eyes shone brightly and she waved happily to him, her eyes reflecting with unshed tears and her face about to split from the size of her smile. Harry felt his heart swell at her enthusiastic response, along with the more subtle eye-dabbing and watery smile of Mrs. Weasley and the huge grins by both Mr. Weasley and Mr. Granger. As he made his way to the water bridge once more, he fought contented tears, realizing that he was wrong earlier. Between Professor McGonagall, Dumbledore, Hagrid, the Weasleys and the Grangers, he had more than enough people who looked at him and truly cared. As he took a seat with the rest of the students who were done, he gave a large grin when Ron's name was called and joined the twins in their stream of whistles and catcalls to their brother. Ron's face turned bright red under all the attention and he smiled brightly to Dumbledore when the older wizard told him that he had qualified to become a staff member of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. When Blaise Zabini finally made his way off of the water bridge into the area where all of the other students were located, Dumbledore took the podium once more. "Everyone I would like to present." The students stood as they had rehearsed. The Hogwarts graduating class of 1998. Thunderous applause began once more, only slightly drowned out by the fireworks that the students shot from their wands in celebration. Harry laughed heartily when Ron pulled him into a huge bear hug, babbling on and on about an interview that his dad had promised to secure if he qualified for the sports department. His laugh turned into a contented sigh as warm arms wrapped around him from behind. Shifting around, he pulled Hermione into a tight hug and gave her a deep before pulling back and grinning down at her. "Congratulations, love," he grinned. "I told you, you did smashing." She blushed prettily in response before giving him another peck. "So did you, Harry. Have you considered Dumbledore's offer?" He chuckled. "I had wondered how long it would take you. 0.4 seconds, not bad." He winked. "You lasted longer than I thought you would." She rolled her eyes and removed one arm from around his neck, hitting him playfully in the shoulder. "Ha ha," she smirked. "Hermione." Mrs. Granger called. Harry and Hermione quickly disentangled themselves and turned to face the families who were approaching. They gave broad smiles to the Grangers, who immediately pulled them into hugs, while the Weasleys greeted Ron. Then switched hugging parents. "Wow, Hermione, brilliant job," said George. "Yeah, way to make everyone else feel inadequate," grinned Fred. Hermione rolled her eyes while Harry and Ron nodded in agreement. As everyone was herded into the Great Hall for the graduation feast, the twins' jokes continued, added onto by a jaunty Ella Granger. An hour or so later, Harry frowned a bit as words from a conversation between Bill and Mr. Weasley floated down to his side of the table. "Emergency," Bill was saying with a frown. "Well, this is supposed to be the safest place, which is why he insisted upon going himself. He wanted us to stay here just in case. But wouldn't it have been better for Dumbledore to send one of us? What about Mad Eye? He's on his way too. Several people are injured, but as far as we know there's only been one fatality." Harry frowned and looked to his right where his girlfriend was sitting. Hermione was looking down at her plate, her brows knitted together in concentration as she strained to pick up the conversation. As he looked across the table at the worried faces of Ron and Luna, a tingle began at the nape of his neck. Harry's gaze flicked to the large table at the front of the hall, his eyes lingering on the empty seat normally occupied by the headmaster. Taking a deep breath to try to calm the sudden uneasiness that caused his stomach to flutter, he allowed his gaze to scan the hall. As it did, he frowned slightly when he noticed Neville and Professor Flitwick near the doors leading to the Great Hall. His frown deepened when a horrified look crossed the dark-haired boy's face a scant moment before he was forcibly pushed out of the Great Hall by the normally docile and joyous professor. When Professor Cypher suddenly ran down the aisle and out the door in the direction that the two had just disappeared to, Harry quickly stood from the table. The curious gazes of the Weasleys and Grangers flicked to him as he pulled out his wand. "Something's wrong," he said in a hard tone. Then, without another word, he turned and headed towards the exit, vaguely noticing that his girlfriend and best mate were right behind him. As they neared, a scream erupted from the entrance to the Great Hall, followed by an unmistakable haunting laughter, a laughter that seemed to have jumped straight from Harry's nightmares and right back into his reality. At Neville's scream, Harry's swift walk towards the exit hastened to a sprint. Coming to an abrupt halt at the top of the stairs before the Great Hall, he watched worriedly as Professor Cypher faced off with Rodolphus Lestrange. The ruby-eyed professor took several steps back in their direction as Bellatrix issued a loud hiss towards Harry from her location behind her husband and his brother Rabaston. "Take Neville and get into the Great Hall now," she shouted without even looking in their direction. Harry, Hermione and Ron nodded, rushing forward to help the other boy up from his location sprawled on the floor near her feet. His expression was dazed as he looked up at him. They could tell he had been hit with some type of curse. His eyes were unblinking and unfocused. "Neville," Hermione quizzed softly. "We need you to stand for us, can you do that?" "We don't have time to coddle him, Hermione," rebuffed Ron, reaching forward and hauling the other boy up. Harry quickly stepped forward to help steady him. As they made their way, balancing Neville between them back towards the Great Hall, Harry noticed Arthur and Bill Weasley joined Professor Cypher in the face-off with the Lestranges. "This way, children," someone called. Looking over, Harry saw Professor Flitwick beckoning them to a hallway just right of the Great Hall. "This way, we'll get him to Madame Pomfrey right off," he said with a small smile. Ron and Hermione began to head in that direction, but Harry held fast as he recalled the scene between the professor and Neville in the Great Hall. Wasn't he the one that the other boy had left with? Correction, wasn't he the one who had forced the other boy out of the room? "Harry," whispered Ron harshly, "what are you doing? Come on." "No," the dark-haired boy stated firmly. "Hermione, stop," he commanded. His girlfriend threw him a surprised look but stopped nonetheless, regarding him curiously. "Harry, what's wrong?" "He is," Harry stated with a frown. "Help Ron get Neville into the Great Hall. When you do, send Professor McGonagall out right away." He kept his eyes trained on the small professor, who was now watching him with a narrowed gaze. "Something's not right, and I mean to find out what it is." At that comment, both Ron and Hermione looked at the professor once more, now discerning the shifty light in his eyes and the strange twisted smile upon his features that didn't travel past his lips. Observing their silent study of them, the professor cocked his head to the side, resembling a large bird at the strange tick-like motion before his grin became more pronounced. Oh dear," he commented in an oddly far-away tone. "Seems to be a problem indeed. I shall have to handle the problem before it spreads." That was the only warning that they had of what was to come. The spell came so quickly that Harry knew it could have easily been the end of one of them if Hermione hadn't, amazingly enough, been able to get a shield up just in time. The silent spell bounced off the barrier and hit the wall next to Flitwick, causing a section of the stone to burst into several large pieces. As the dust cleared, Harry looked on, horrified to see that while the professor had gotten out of the way, he was now no longer alone. He was flanked by 6 Death Eaters. Wands raised, they began shouting off spells. "Confundo!" yelled Hermione as Harry barely deflected a spell, only to be advanced upon by another Death Eater. "Protega!" shouted a voice to his left. Harry's surprised gaze flew to Neville, who once more looked alert. Giving a relieved sigh, Harry released the other boy and grabbed Hermione's hand, rushing the rest of the way towards the Great Hall with Neville and Ron in tow. "Get to your parents," he called to Hermione, turning to face off with Ada, who is not far behind them. "But," she pleaded, her conflicted gaze flying between her boyfriend, who was hurling spells and deflecting curses, and her terrified-looking parents, who were being guarded by an anxious-looking Molly Weasley. "Expelliarmus!" "But nothing, Hermione, go!" shouted Harry. Chaos had erupted in the Great Hall as the remaining teachers rushed towards the door and families scrambled towards the back of the room. Harry gave a small sigh of relief when, after a small hesitation, his girlfriend disappeared from his side. He knew that she had gone to her parents. He also knew that she would be back after a while, but at least for now she was safe. "Duro!" Ron shouted from his left. Harry threw him an impressed look when one of the DEs turned to stone. "Not bad, mate," he shouted between yelling off several spells of his own. "Thanks." Ron shot him a quick grin before ducking a spell aimed for his head. "Couldn't have done it without the DA." Harry nodded absently as he and Professor Cypher shot off simultaneous hexes, pushing the DEs back towards the exit of the Great Hall. He knew what Ron meant. He still remembered covering that lesson in the DA, mainly because Neville had turned his feet to stone and had to be carried to Madame Pomfrey's office by him, Ron and Dean. Hazarding a quick look to his left and right, he was pleased to see the members of the DA fighting alongside the professors. As Dean shot off a spell sending one of the larger DEs out the door, Harry grinned and finally began to relax a bit. This would be no problem. Once they reached the hall once more, his grin faltered as he realized that he had spoken too soon. Several more Death Eaters seemed to materialize from nowhere, and these were a lot faster moving than the last. With their forces down due to several teachers like Sprout, Burbage and Hagrid evacuating families through the door at the back of the Great Hall, he quickly realized that easy was not the way to describe this battle. Harry let out a painful grunt as he was hit in the with a spell and flew backwards further into the hall. As he skidded along the floor from the force, he came to a halt next to the benches of the Hufflepuff table, hitting his head painfully on the side. Groaning, he rubbed the back of his head where he had been hit before stiffening at the sound of laughter coming from his far right. Setting up a bit, he was incensed to see Malfoy and his 2 cronies Tweedledee and Tweedledum watching the battle as though it were some type of show put on for their amusement. Giving an inaudible growl, he pointed his wand at the table and called out a spell, making the water pitcher next to them explode. He gave a small laugh and a self-satisfied smirk when Malfoy screamed like a girl and fell out off of the bench onto the floor. "Protega totalum! Confundo! Expelliarmus!" a voice called from just behind Harry. The dark-haired boy looked over and saw a nearby Death Eater fly into the far wall. He turned his head just in time to see his girlfriend skid to a halt next to him. Ducking when a spell was shot her way, Hermione threw Harry a disgruntled look. "What the hell were you doing? You almost got yourself killed," she hissed, throwing up another protection spell. "Sorry, I had something to take care of," he replied, calling out another disarming spell and shouting off a counter curse. "Yeah, like frightening Malfoy," she shot back with a glare. "What?" Harry exclaimed, standing and pulling her with him as several hexes came their way. "He deserved it." "Yeah, well, you deserved to get hit for being so ruddy careless," she called back, shouting off another spell and taking out a rather large Death Eater. Harry sighed and pulled her against him as a killing curse flew past her head. "Maybe," he conceded with a shrug, "but obviously we don't always get what we deserve," he finished, throwing a scowl to the Slytherins who were now heading out of the fighting area led by Malfoy's mum. Hermione rolled her eyes. "Let it go, Harry, we have more important things to worry about right now," she did, and shot off a curse, causing boils to break out on the DE's hands, if you hadn't noticed. Harry gritted his teeth against a frustrated retort and refocused on the fight. He pushed Hermione in one direction and dove in another just as one of the large benches came hurtling towards them. Grabbing a metal tray off the table and paying no heed to the rolls that now littered the floor, he used it to deflect a more harmless curse back at the Death Eater who had shot it. "Ella, watch out!" Harry started at hearing Hermione's mum's name. Turning quickly he saw Ella Granger standing frozen just behind the teacher's platform. Her eyes wide and her mouth open as another bench flew full tilt right for her. "No!" The agonized scream ripped from Hermione's throat snapped Harry out of his stupor. "Levicorpus!" he shouted. A moment later Ella Granger was lifted into the air by her ankle, the bench slamming into the wall where she had been moments earlier just seconds later. Harry was racing behind Hermione to her mum, deflecting and protecting her from the curses that she was forgetting to look out for in her haste. When they arrived Dan had already reached his wife and was holding his arms up, clasping fingers with her. "Liberacorpus!" Harry called when they were almost to the couple. Ella floated back down to the floor just in time to get tackled by her daughter. "Mum, Mum, 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 Mum," Hermione just kept whispering over and over again. "I'm okay," Ella whispered in her daughter's neck and her husband's cheek as he too joined the impromptu hug. I know," whispered Dan pulling back and studying her face. "But how?" "I don't know," the older woman shrugged, shaking her head in wonder. Hermione pulled back from her mom and wiped her tears. "Harry," she breathed. The dark-haired boy, who had been busy watching over the small family reunion, had not been paying attention to the conversation, so he was surprised to feel his girlfriend fly into him. Grunting a bit at the impact, he shifted and put one arm around her, attempting to keep his wand arm free just in case. "Thank you, Harry. Thank you so much," she breathed, in his neck, then his chin, then his lips and wreaking havoc on his concentration. When she pulled back a moment later he was surprised to be the recipient of yet another strong hug. A moment later and after placing a of her own on his cheek, Ella Granger pulled back and offered him a small smile. "I guess I owe you my life, huh?" Harry blushed. "It was nothing, you should." "It was everything," Dan Granger interrupted. Harry gave him a quick look and a small nod, unable to argue with the logic in that statement. He couldn't even begin to imagine the Grangers without Ella. It was just too impossible, too depressing. "I also owe you for Hermione's life," the older man continued with a wry smile. Harry's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "If anything, she's saved me. I mean, I would have been dead at least twice already during this fight if it weren't for her. And she would have been dead how many times on her mad dash over here if it weren't for you." Dan stated seriously. "You saved the two people who matter most in my life, Harry, and just earned yourself a position as the third." His eyes flicked between him and Hermione. "So, you two, be careful out there." They both gave quick nods. "Why didn't you guys leave with everyone else?" Hermione asked, voicing Harry's initial thoughts. "That's my fault," Ella said sheepishly. "I couldn't just leave with you two still in here. I mean, you're just children. I would have gone mad not knowing that you were okay." Harry gave her a small smile. "Hermione's the brightest witch of her age, you have nothing to worry about." "And Harry's the strongest wizard of many ages," Hermione chimed. Harry threw her a look. You've done stuff, been through things that were indescribable, yet you still fight. You have lightning-fast reflexes, and every student out there fighting is able to hold their own because of what you taught them." Harry turned and gave a look to the students in question, allowing himself a small smile as one of the Potter twins hit a DE with a spell that made him punch himself in the face, and Ginny Weasley hit another with a spell that made his wand arm grow so large that it tipped him over. However, his smile quickly fell when he noticed Ron on the ground and a Death Eater standing over him, his wand pointed. "Ron!" Harry and Hermione called out in unison. However, before either could lift their wands, someone else called out too. "Avis! Avis!" Luna Lovegood shouted. Two small flocks of twittering birds appeared behind the then, like something out of a twisted Muggle fairy tale, she sent then with a large brandish of her wand hurling towards the DE who had Ron down. Harry and Hermione watched in amused shock as the birds attacked the large man, pecking in at his mask and biting at his hands. They cringed a bit when they realized that the birds were going for flesh. The DE swatted helplessly at the squawking animals and made a mad dash for the exit of the Great Hall, a large flock of angry birds following in his wake. "You two get somewhere safe," Hermione called to her parents before taking off after Harry, who had rushed over to Ron. "Ron, are you all right?" Harry asked, looking his mate over. Yeah, just a bit of a headache is all, Ron shrugged before giving an admiring look to his girlfriend. Wow, I've never seen anything like that. Harry and Hermione nodded in agreement and the blonde girl blushed. Yes, well, he shouldn't have been messing with you, she muttered. Ron grinned and sat up, giving her a light. I'm sure that he won't ever make that mistake again, he winked. Luna's blush deepened. I'd hate to break up this moment, but we're kind of in the middle of something here, guys. Dean Thomas called from a few feet away. Oh, right. Sorry, shouted Harry, standing to help the other boy fight off the two large Death Eaters that were blocking his way. Hermione gave a quick glance to the back of the hall. Relieved to see her parents no longer in sight, she went back to the battle also. The blood-curdling laughter of Bellatrix Lestrange brought Harry's attention abruptly from the DE he was facing off with. He jumped out of the way just in time for the spell that the man had hurled to blast a chuck out of the wall before freezing on his spot on the floor. Across the hall, Ginny Weasley was on the ground writhing in pain, with Bellatrix standing over her, a twisted smile on her gruesome features. No! Harry yelled, distractedly hearing the sentiment repeated by several members of the Weasley clan. However, before any of them could get a spell off, Bellatrix was hurled into the wall just past Ginny's prone form. Harry watched in shocked awe as Neville Longbottom quickly jumped over Ginny, blocking the younger girl from Bellatrix's view with his own body. The older woman hissed at him and gave a small smile, Serpensortia. A large deadly S flew from her wand, hissing at the dark-haired boy and winding back and forth looking for the right place to strike. Confringo, Neville called without hesitation. Harry cringed when the serpent exploded into tiny bloody pieces before quickly standing and resuming the fight with his own Death Eater. 5 minutes later, when he finally had the DE safely encased in stone, he returned his attention to the fight between Bellatrix and Neville. Harry gave an appreciative nod at the litheness of the other boy when he seamlessly removed himself from the way of a killing curse. Harry's gaze searched the ground for Ginny, and he sighed in relief when he located her awake and alert, watching the fight from a short distance away, being held protectively by Mrs. Weasley. Rushing forward, the dark-haired boy lifted his wand to add a couple of curses to Neville's when his arm was grabbed. Giving a startled look to his right, he was surprised to see Ron holding him back. Ron, what? The red-haired boy shook his head. Don't, he wants to do it himself. But, no buts, Harry, Dad gave him the go-ahead. The dark-haired threw a shot look to Arthur Weasley, who was on the other side of the hall also watching the fight. As his gaze took in the scene, he realized that several people, DE and student Auror alike, had stopped to watch the battle. But, Harry shook his head lightly, I can't just stand here. Ron, she killed Sirius. The other boy sighed and gave him a sympathetic look. I know, mate, but, well, she did a lot worse to his parents. Harry looked down. Come on, mate, look, if he can't handle her, then you have free rein to jump in and give it a go, but well, give him a chance. He deserves it, you know. Harry bit the inside of his cheek and gave a stiff nod. The tension ebbed away from his body somewhat when a warm hand lightly touched his back. Turning his head, he gave a brief small smile to his girlfriend before looking back at the fight. One of Bellatrix's spells sliced through Neville's arm. A huge gash appeared and red blood steadily flowed as several shouts of laughter rang out from the Death Eaters. Harry tightly clenched his wand and gritted his teeth. Don't kill the little bastard, sweet, we still need him, the deep voice of Rodolphus Lestrange called out playfully. Harry took a step in his direction, but Hermione forestalled him by placing a hand on his arm. Harry, look. Turning his gaze back to the fight, he was surprised to see Bellatrix get hit with one of Neville's attacks. Stumbling backwards, the older woman tripped slightly over an overturned bench at the Slytherin table before brandishing her wand once more. Expulso! She shouted. Neville jumped out of the way and part of the Ravenclaw table behind him was blown into small pieces. He barely had time before she was on him again. Crucio! The dark-haired boy as well as several people behind him to avoid the spell. Fight back! Harry yelled impatiently. Neville ignored him and Bellatrix smiled. Fight back, little Neville Weevil, she sang while shooting off another curse. It's not fun if you don't. Your parents fought back. Her smile widened. Well, at first. The dark-haired boy clenched his teeth but still did not yell out a single spell. Harry and Ron shared bewildered looks. Well, this is turning into a downright bore, Bellatrix said, rolling her eyes. I bet Potter can give me something more interesting to play with, she leered in Harry's direction. Hermione grabbed his arm again. We don't really need him alive, do we, dear? She called in the direction of her husband. The large man shrugged. I suppose it was a bit on the optional side, Rodolphus replied with a wide twisted grin. Oh goody, she sang before turning sharply back to Neville. As quick as a serpent's strike she called her most dangerous spell. Avada Kedavra. No. Harry along with several others called, however the dark-haired boy didn't look worried. A moment after she shouted out the killing curse he reached behind his back and pulled out one of those sterling silver trays like Harry had used earlier. The spell hit the shining surface and immediately deflected back. Bellatrix had only time enough to let out a strangled scream before she was hit dead center with her own curse. No! Her husband roared as her wide-eyed body limply hit the cold ground. Several people including Harry pulled their wands but it was too late. The large man shouted out a spell that hit Neville so hard that he flew into the air and connected roughly with the wall at the back of the Great Hall. His body made a sickening crunching sound before slamming the floor like a rag doll. The fight immediately began once more, but Rodolphus Lestrange seemed numb to it as he made his way over to his wife's prone form. His brother deflected and countered the curse's shot at them while the large Death Eater grabbed the body from the ground. Lifting his wand he blew out one of the windows of the Great Hall before running over to it, and with the agility of a large cat he jumped onto the ledge and out of the opening with his brother in tow. Not caring for now about if the Lestranges escaped, Harry took off in the direction of Neville, distractedly noticing that the Death Eaters were attempting to make a hasty retreat. Coming to a skidding halt at the wall, he recoiled a bit at the gruesome image of the usually quiet dark-haired boy lying in a crumpled heap on the floor. His body twisted in a manner that would make it seem that he had no bones if it weren't for several of them jutting out in various odd and sickening ways. Ginny Weasley was over him crying, while Hermione had turned and buried her head in Harry's shoulder as soon as he arrived. "Stand back," ordered a strong voice. Harry turned to see Professor Cypher pushing through the small crowd that had gathered. Kneeling down next to the body she reached out a hand to his twisted neck and pressed down. "He has a pulse, get Madame Pomfrey here right now," she demanded. "If we hurry I know we can save him." Harry let out a ragged breath as Bill Weasley disappeared in the direction of the door at the back of the Great Hall where the healer had evacuated with the families. Closing his eyes and giving his girlfriend a strong squeeze he feverishly prayed that the professor was right. Hermione slowly made her way through the infirmary and to the last bed at the end. Pulling back the curtains she immediately saw who she had been looking for. Ginny Weasley was sitting on the side of Neville's bed, her head down and her hand clasping his. The soft light of the candle on his nightstand was the only source of illumination, casting a dim and slightly romantic glow over the duo. Hermione smiled softly to herself. The younger girl had not left Neville's side since Professor Cypher, whom they had learned was an Auror of all things, and Mr. Weasley had levitated him on a bed to the infirmary. Madame Pomfrey had worked on him for over 2 hours, but like a good ending to a bad Muggle fairy tale she had indeed been able to put Neville back together again. Hermione watched Ginny lean forward and push some of the older boy's hair out of his face when he shifted in his sleep and smiled once more. Maybe Ginny is finally opening her eyes to her feelings as well as Neville's, she thought before her smile faltered a bit and she took a deep breath. She hated to break up the moment between the two but she was here for a reason. There was finally a break in all the chaos and she really needed to talk to the younger girl about something. Taking the last few steps forward she placed a hand lightly on the red-haired girl's shoulder. "Ginny." Ginny turned her head slightly and gave Hermione a fleeting look before looking down at the boy in the bed once more. "Hey." The older witch made her way towards the top of the bed so that she was in front of the younger one. "Hey, where's Neville's gran? She's getting a quick kip," the other girl replied, motioning to a bed across the way. "She was exhausted and I let her know that I would stay with him." Hermione nodded. "So how's he doing?" "He'll be all right, just needs some rest. At least that's what Madame Pomfrey says." "And how are you doing?" She looked up at the other girl in surprise. "Me? Yes you, Ginny Weasley," Hermione replied arching a brow. "You've been here for hours, not to mention the battle and everything else that happened today. How are you doing?" Ginny nodded slowly and looked down at her and Neville's hands. "I'm doing, I suppose. I can't believe what he did. Yeah, he was really great out there," the other girl agreed looking down at his face once more. "I know, and the way he got me out of the way, Hermione, he saved my life," she whispered. "Yes, well that's just the type of bloke that Neville is." Ginny gave a jerky nod. I still can't believe what he did for me, she whispered. Why not? Hermione quizzed, Ginny's gaze shot to her. Come on Gin, I mean he's a great bloke sure, but it's no secret that Neville fancies you, he has for quite some time. The younger girl gave her a surprised look and her gaze shifted between the two before settling on Hermione once more. He does. Yeah, Hermione laughed. Where have you been? Ginny sighed and frowned. Obsessing over a bloke who can barely stand, and in no way at all fancies me. The brunette's smile faded and she chewed worriedly on her bottom lip. Oh Gin, that's not true. Harry can stand you, you mean a lot to him, to us. I was a brat, the redhead replied, not looking up. We deserved it, well, Harry and I did, but Ginny, Ron didn't do anything. She nodded. I know, I just hated that he had forgiven the two of you so easily, therefore making me look even more pathetic. Hermione sighed and took seat in the chair next to the bed. You weren't pathetic, Ginny. When the other girl shot her a, get real, look, she winced and amended her statement. You weren't. Sure, you were perhaps a bit psychotic, totally obsessive and maybe a tad stalkerish, but not at all pathetic. The younger girl laughed softly. Gee, thanks. She looked over at her. Hermione, I'm sorry for constantly trying to hex you and snog your boyfriend. The brunette winced and looked at her hands briefly before looking back at her. There's no need, you see, I snogged your boyfriend first. What? Ginny asked with a frown. Hermione sighed. Gin, there's something I didn't tell you that I've been wanting to. It's actually the reason I'm here. At the other girl's questioning look she continued. You see, Harry and I snogged before you guys broke up. She stumbled, then scrunched her eyes closed when she was done and waited for the hex. When? Ginny frowned. The brunette kept her eyes shut and whispered. The day Ron and I broke up. Good. Hermione's eyes snapped open and she looked the younger girl. Excuse me. Good. Ginny frowned. Well, not really, but yeah, in a way. I mean, I knew that something had happened between you two that day, but Ron and everyone else I mentioned it to just told me I was overreacting or going mental. She looked over at the older girl, but my gut had told me something happened and it was usually right. So when Ron came back and told me that you two had had a row and that was all, I felt like I couldn't trust myself anymore, like my instincts were off. Then when I found out about the two of you I felt I couldn't trust either of you anymore, and then when Ron continued to call you guys his best mates instead of flipping out as usual I felt like I couldn't trust him anymore. Which basically left no one, not even myself, that I could trust. Her gaze flicked to the bed. Well, almost no one. The older witch sat quietly for a moment before speaking. Is that how you ended up with Malfoy? Ginny blushed and shrugged. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I was angry at you. He was angry at Harry. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Why? I don't know. I guess part of me was hoping that Harry would be so upset by the notion he's come running back to steal me from Draco. And another part of me, she trailed off, her blush deepening. Another part of you. Hermione hedged. Well, another part of me loved the snogging. I mean, he may have been a git, but Draco is a great Ew, the brunette made a face and the redhead giggled. Gin, that is absolutely disgusting. I'm going to be scarred for life now. Great, just bloody brilliant. Hey, the truth is the truth, the younger girl shrugged with a grin. Besides, you scarred me for life a while ago, so this just may make us even. Hermione sighed and ran a hand through her hair. I guess it might. She bit her bottom lip again. Ginny, I really am sorry for what we did to you, what I did to you. And I want you to know that Harry and I never expected to feel what we feel for one another, and when we did, then we fought it. We fought it hard, with everything in us, because we didn't want to hurt you or Ron. Fought it hard. Ginny's brows rose. How hard? The other girl smiled. Well, let's just say that if our lives were a story and the story began this summer, out of I don't know, 35 or so chapters, we fought what we felt for at least 22 and a half, if not more. Wow, that's way over half the story, the younger girl smirked. Hermione nodded. Yeah, I know, if I were a reader I wouldn't be too happy about it myself. I'd probably write little reviews to the author complaining about the time frame. Me too, though I'd be rooting for Harry to stay with me. Ginny shot the older girl a look and then laughed softly. Hermione joined in for a moment until the other girl sighed and looked back down at Neville. Do you think he'll forgive me for being such a prat? Hermione nodded. I know he will, especially if you can forgive me and Harry for being the biggest prats ever. The redhead's gaze flicked to her briefly before returning to the boy in the bed. I can try. That's all I can ask. Hermione replied with a small sigh. They sat in silence for several more minutes before Ginny spoke again. Did you guys ever find out what they wanted with Neville? She frowned, looking up. Hermione nodded. Yeah, Agent Cypher explained it to us. It seems that after his battle with Dumbledore, Voldemort had seen two people. A healer to help him recover from his injury, though all they did was provide a potion or two. From what I understand, he doesn't trust anyone enough for them to do more than that. In a seer. The seer informed him that he could forego the need for any future potions and regain all of his strength and possibly a bit more if he got one very important ingredient. The brunette frowned. The blood of the boy who lived. Harry? Ginny inquired. When Hermione nodded, she threw a quick look to Neville. But what does that have to do with him? The brunette sighed. Well, Harry is virtually impossible to gain access to. He's probably the most well-guarded wizard of our time, a fact that Voldemort is aware of. When he told the seer of this, he was informed that, though it may not be as potent, the blood of another boy of the same age and birthday may be just as useful to his needs. Neville, Ginny whispered. Hermione nodded. As you know, the only thing that made Harry the boy who lived, as opposed to Neville, was the fact that Voldemort chose to go after Harry instead. So his blood could still have healing qualities. Not as potent as Harry, but yes, at least that was the belief. She shrugged. Is it true? Ginny frowned. I don't know. She shook her head. I don't know. They fell into a comfortable silence, each retreating to their own thoughts about the new information that had been gained. So Cypher was sent here to protect Neville? Ginny asked after a while. Hermione nodded. Yes, I believe she is an Auror from Ireland or something. The brunette frowned. Mad Eye says that they placed her here as opposed to an English agent so that any spies for the DEs would not know they had an agent on the inside. Also so that we wouldn't realize that we were being watched and start worrying, since Harry knew most of the Aurors already thanks to his trips to the Ministry. Ginny nodded. Why didn't they tell me? A voice cut in. Hermione and Ginny's gaze shot to the dark-haired boy in the bed. Neville stared at them from behind sleepy lids, his curious gaze trained on Hermione. I don't know. All I can say is that they rarely tell us anything. It's quite vexing if you want to know the truth. After all, if they would just be honest with us, we may be able to prevent half of this stuff from happening. She frowned. Neville sighed. I just wish someone had let me in on the secret. It was my life after all that they were gambling with. Both girls nodded in agreement. So, how are you, feeling? Ginny inquired, reaching out a hand and pushing a few stray hairs from his face. He averted his gaze and shrugged. All right, I guess, kind of sore and a bit of a headache, but... The redhead nodded. Well, good. Not about the soreness or the headache, but that you're all right. Good for that, that is. Neville nodded and Hermione suppressed a smile. How long have I been out? He inquired, glancing at the clock across the room. A couple of hours, supplied Ginny. He nodded again. I'm actually surprised you're up so soon. Madame Pomfrey predicted you would be resting at least till late tomorrow afternoon. Really? He frowned. She nodded. Your gran is here, she's just across the way catching a quick kip. Good. Yeah. Hermione looked between the two as they snuck glances at one another and smiled softly to herself. Well, I'm going to go and let everyone know that you're okay, Neville, she said aloud. I think Ginny wanted to talk to you about something anyway. She finished, giving the red-haired girl a pointed look. Ginny's eyes widened and she shook her head. No, I think I'm good. Really? I thought you wanted to say thanks, and something else if I remember correctly. Hermione frowned. Ginny blushed. Right, the older girl repeated. Coming forward, she gave Neville a light on the head, then turned to Ginny, pulling her into a light hug. Tell him how you feel, trust me, he feels the same way. Besides, she pulled back and finished in a low tone, after the way he fought today, you can't be expecting him to stay single for long. The younger girl sighed and frowned and Hermione gave her a smile. I'll catch you later, Nev. With that and a jaunty wave she headed through the curtains, making sure to loudly call out a silencing charm on her way to let them know that they had a spot of privacy. Ginny chuckled and Hermione shot her a wink. Have fun, you two. Harry looked up as his girlfriend re-entered Gryffindor Tower. Standing, he approached her and pulled her into a strong hug. How did it go? He inquired, pulling back and leading her over to the couch where Ron and Luna sat. A lot better than I thought I would, she breathed, taking a seat next to him and laying her head against his. Where are my parents? In your dorm, they're using your room tonight, he replied. What does, a lot better than you thought, mean? Quizzed Ron, lightly stroking Luna's hair. It means, she was oddly enough, relieved by the information. What? Harry and Ron exclaimed in unison. I know. I felt the same way, but it's true. She says that her gut had told her something had happened and she was relieved to find out that her instincts were still spot on, the brunette shrugged. Ron and Harry shared a look and the redhead rolled his eyes. Bloody women, he muttered. Hermione shot him a glower, and just what does that mean? That means that if I found out that you and Harry snogged before we broke up, relieved would not be the word to describe the exact emotion that I felt, he stated with a frown. When Harry winced and exhaled, Ron threw him a look. Did we what? Harry asked. Did you two snog before we broke up? The other boy frowned, sitting up a bit on the couch. Harry opened and then closed his mouth. Well, did you? Hermione interrupted, lifting her head from her boyfriend's and studying her red-haired mate. Did I what? Did you and Luna snog before you and I broke up? She inquired, arching a brow. Ron turned a dull red and Luna grimaced a bit. Well, so how's Neville doing? Hermione gave him a smug look and laid her head back on Harry's as he relaxed once more and gave a deep chuckle. He's doing well, she replied, dropping the other subject. He was up and talking when I left. In fact, that's why I left, so that he and Ginny would have a moment alone to hash a few things out. What kind of things? Asked Ron. Hermione and Luna shared a look and the brunette rolled her eyes. Oh, for goodness sake, don't be obtuse, Ronald. I'm not. It was a perfectly logical question, he frowned. It was stupid, it's quite obvious what they had to talk about, she replied. How is it obvious? Oh please, how is it not? Just because you ruddy well think something. All right, Harry called, cutting them off. Ron, she's taking about them going over whether or not they fancy one another. Hermione, lay off of Ron, you know reading signs is not his forte. Oi. That's not true, the other boy exclaimed. Harry snorted and rolled his eyes. Oh come on, Ron, how long did it take you to realize that Hermione fancied you? Or that Luna fancied you, or to suss out that Hermione and I were? All right, he grumbled, I get your bleedin' point, no need to do a detailed recounting. Harry smirked and Luna giggled. Don't worry, Plumperdink, you have other skills, she winked. Ron blushed a deep red. Harry arched a brow at them. Are you too? He cut off with a grunt when his girlfriend elbowed him. That is not any of your business, Harry, she stated primly. Harry rolled his eyes and then shot Ron a discreet questioning look. The huge grin that spread over his mate's face told him all that he needed to know. Well, we should head out, Ron said a second later. I'm going to go on over to Ravenclaw Tower with Luna since most of her house is gone and whatnot. When Harry and Hermione arched brows at them, both teens blushed. He helps to keep the Duberdomons away, they commented softly. I'm sure that's not all he helps to do, muttered Harry, wincing when Hermione elbowed him again. Geez love, what are you trying to do? Permanently bruise me? Hermione shot him a glower but didn't respond. We'll see you two tomorrow then, she smiled. Luna smiled back. Yes, tomorrow. Ron nodded and winked at Harry before the two stood and quickly made their way out of the portrait. Finally alone with his girlfriend, Harry pulled her back into his arms and held her close. I'm glad that you're okay, he whispered, ing the top of her head. I'm glad that you are, she murmured back, lightly ing his. Harry. Thank you. For what? For my life, for my mum's life. Well, thank you for my life too. I'm serious, Hermione stated, pulling back and looking up at him. Thank you for what you did. If it weren't for you, my mum. He sighed and ed her lips lightly. You don't need to thank me for that. It is something that I would do again and again if need be. She exhaled and gave him a watery smile. I know, when he nodded she cupped his face. But I still want to thank you. You already did, he smiled. No, I mean, thank you. Harry's brows rose. Thank me. She nodded. Right now. She nodded again. But, here. She chuckled. No, your room. But I think Seamus is still here. She shrugged and stood from the couch. Harry watched the sway of her hips entranced as she slowly sauntered to the stairs of the boys' dorm. True, she replied, throwing an impish smile over her shoulder. However, if I remember correctly, your bed does come with a rather sturdy set of curtains and, if I do say so myself, I am quite adept at silencing charms, she finished, twirling her wand. Harry's mouth dropped a bit before a huge grin spread over his features. As he hopped up from the couch, Hermione let out a girlish giggle and sprinted up the steps to the dorm, her boyfriend hot on her trail. Harry stood at the bottom of the stairs, his bag a few feet away near the front door as he watched his girlfriend hug both of her parents. Are you sure you can't write or something? Ella was asking with an anxious look. I'll try, Mum, but I can't guarantee it, Hermione replied with a frown. We're on a serious mission here and there will be people looking for us. I can't allow them to trace me back to you guys. Don't worry, chimed Mrs. Weasley, we'll keep an eye on your parents, dear. Hermione gave her a grateful smile and a quick hug. Thank you, Mrs. Weasley. Harry smiled also. It was a couple of weeks after graduation and into the summer, and they were about to head off to find the remaining Horcruxes. Harry, Hermione and the Grangers had arrived to the Burrow a couple of days ago so that they could have some time to hang out together with their mates and their parents could get a briefing from Mr. and Mrs. Weasley as to what exactly was going on. Harry was relieved when the parents retreated to the living room to talk over everything and left them to their own devices. He didn't like being in the room when people heard his story. They always looked at him oddly and it made him feel uncomfortable. By the time they saw the Grangers a few hours later, they were up to date on everything that had occurred. Ella had pulled Harry into a strong embrace and whispered that she loved him, while Dan had given him a hearty handshake, an admiring look, and said that he was proud of him. The dark-haired boy had blushed under the attention and grudgingly accepted the compliments from the two as well as the ones added on by the Weasleys before deflecting some of the praise to Hermione and Ron, who had been with him every step of the way. That in turn caused a round of tears from Ella, who berated herself for not being aware of the danger her daughter was in every day, as well as a demand from her to summon Dumbledore so that the headmaster could explain to her face why they, Hermione's parents, hadn't been informed when she had been hurt at school, especially second year when she had been petrified. Her husband and Mrs. Weasley took straight away to soothing the other woman's ruffled feathers, as everyone instantly realized that they did not want to see what happened when you mixed a man like Dumbledore with an irate Ella Granger. 45 minutes, 3 arguments and 1 very long owl to the headmaster later. All was well once more and the family sat calmly in the living room going over just what the trio had planned for their search. They had decided to start where he and Dumbledore had left off and resume the hunt for the locket. Hermione had several ideas of other possible items and locations that they were going to explore once they had the locket in hand. In the meantime, the Grangers would be staying with the Weasleys for a while and would have guard of the very capable Weasley twins when at their dentistry to work. The newest couple in their midst, Ginny and Neville, would take over the command of the DA at Hogwarts to continue to train students to defend themselves should the need arise. Neville would be staying up the road in Hogsmeade so that he was close to the school in case anything else happened there. Harry was pulled back to the present as Hermione put her arm around his waist and hugged him lightly. "Hey there, where did you head off to?" she inquired softly. He gave a subtle smile. "Nowhere, just thinking. About," she pressed. He chuckled. "About stuff." "What kind of stuff?" she persisted. He grinned and leaned forward a bit. "I don't know, about you, me, private tents and long nights." She blushed and threw a look over her shoulder. "Harry," she reprimanded, "my parents are right there." "I know, that's why I'm only thinking about it," he winked. She slapped his shoulder. "Oh you." He laughed lightly and pecked her softly on the lips. "Ah, come on," griped Ron heading down the stairs, "are you too? At least ready to go before you start all that?" Harry rolled his eyes. "We've been ready," Hermione stated, shifting in her boyfriend's arms so that he was hugging her lightly from behind. "We're waiting on you." "As usual," chimed Harry with a smirk. Ron pulled a face at Harry before addressing Hermione. "Well, we're ready, aren't we, sweetie?" "Oh yes," Luna said, skipping down the last several steps. "Luna dear, are you sure your father doesn't mind?" Mrs. Weasley frowned, referring to the fact that the younger girl would be joining them on their search for the remainder of her summer break. Harry hadn't really wanted her to go, he was worried about placing another person in so much danger. But Ron replied that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. He also informed Harry that he needed Luna there as much as the dark-haired boy needed Hermione. Unable to think up a proper counter to that argument because he knew how much he needed his girlfriend at his side, Harry had relented and agreed to allow Luna to join them for part of their search. The shook her head in response to Mrs. Weasley's question. Oh no, not at all. He thinks it's the perfect way to do a mini expedition for the Snarkak. She grinned excitedly. I can't wait myself, after all we will be camping in some really remote areas. Snarkak? Inquired Mr. Granger with a frown. Don't ask, mumbled Mr. Weasley. That's nice dear, commented Mrs. Weasley. When Harry and Hermione snorted, Ron shot them a glower. I figured that I'd help her. Between the two of us we might even manage a picture, he stated to his mum, giving his girlfriend a small smile. I'm sure, muttered Hermione. Harry dropped his head and laughed into his girlfriend's hair. So is everyone ready to go? Inquired Ron, ignoring his mate's reactions to what he had just said. I am, chimed Luna. Once again, we've been ready, stated Hermione, arching a dark brow. Ron rolled his eyes. Well, let's head out. Do you have your tents? Asked Mrs. Weasley anxiously. Yes, Mum, replied Ron. I have one in my bag, Harry has another. How about food? Quizzed Mrs. Granger with a frown. Yes, Mum, replied Hermione, it's in my bag. Do you have your fireworks? Called Fred from the top of the stairs. Hermione rolled her eyes while Harry and Ron laughed. We don't need fireworks, she stated prudishly with a disapproving frown. Of course you do, replied George. Yeah, they're essential to any Dark Lord Soul expedition, added Fred. You should never leave home without them, chimed George, appearing suddenly between Hermione and her mum. Ella Granger jumped, her hand going to her. Wah! How? Never seen that before, inquired Fred, appearing on the side of her and throwing an arm over her shoulder. Funny, I thought you had. No, I haven't. How did you do that? It's called apparition, supplied George, pulling a bag of fireworks from his coat pocket and handing them to Ron. Wizards use it all the time, threw in Fred, conjuring another bag and handing it to Luna. Fastest way to travel, it is, nodded George. That's how the kids will be getting around, commented Mr. Weasley with a kind smile. Gets you from point A to point B, just as quickly as you can envision point B. Wait, Dan Granger held up a hand. All wizards and witches can do this. Of age, yes, nodded Mrs. Weasley. The other monk's gaze swung to Harry. Can you do it? The dark-haired boy's mouth dropped a bit, but before he could conjure an answer, Mr. Weasley chimed in. Why yes, Harry can. I took him to get his apparitions license as a Christmas present, he grinned, passed with flying colors on his first try. Harry shifted uncomfortably as Dan Granger frowned. The older man studied him for a moment before looking at his daughter. I knew it, he shook his head. I knew it. What did he touch? He exclaimed, jabbing a finger in their direction. Hermione blushed. Nothing, Daddy, geez. Don't nothing me, Dan scoffed, before pacing. I knew it, I told you, Ella. He looked at his wife. Didn't I tell you? He was in her room, I know he was. He stopped and glowered at Harry. What did you touch? Nothing, sir, honest. He shot Mrs. Granger a helpless look. She was watching the two of them with a surprised expression before shaking her head and grabbing her husband's arm. Don't be daft, Dan. Hermione and Harry didn't start seeing one another until she broke up with Ron, which was after they returned to Hogwarts. Ha! Bollocks! Exclaimed Dan. What has he touched? He's touched everything, muttered Ron. Everyone shot the ginger-haired boy dubious looks and he blushed a beet red. Wow, did I say that aloud? He winced. Fred and George gave low whistles while Hermione groaned and covered her face with both hands. For his part, Harry took several steps back towards the door. So, we really should go, we'll call you guys later, bye. Called the dark-haired boy, disappearing through the exit before the last syllable rang out. Wow, said Fred. I think that was faster than apparition, commented George. Dan Granger blinked, once, then twice, before suddenly coming to life. Danny, no, yelled Ella, grabbing her husband's arms and trying to keep him where he was. Fred and George each grabbed a shoulder to help. Her Hermione, dear, she continued, still struggling to be heard over the bellows of her husband for Harry to come the hell back here. Why don't you kids go on and he head out? She called, blowing her daughter a. Hermione nodded quickly and blew her aback before running to the door and grabbing their bags. She gave Ron a punch in the shoulder when they got outside. What the hell was that? Sorry, he shrugged. How did I know it was going to get so bloody quiet at that exact moment? You shouldn't have said it to begin with, you prat, she hissed as they met up with Harry at the end of the drive. The dark-haired boy was craning his neck to look past her. Is it safe? Somewhat, Hermione sighed, throwing Ron another glower. Luna giggled. My mum and the twins have him pinned. Yeah, but for how long? Added Ron, looking at the door. He looked ready to ruddy well kill yo. He trailed off at the set of glares his mates were giving. Right then, well, let's be off. Sure. Oh, and thanks for opening, you huge ruddy mouth, Ron, Harry said sarcastically. What? The other boy frowned. He's just in shock, Harry. It'll blow over, just give him a week or two. Let me go. I'm not going to kill him, I swear. I'm just going to remove every sodding part of his body that touched my pumpkin, and I know just where to start. Dan, you're being ridiculous. Hermione's not a little girl anymore. She's my little girl, she always will be. Now where do you keep your hedge clippers, Arthur? Or a month or two, the redhead corrected, wincing when upon hearing that there were no hedge clippers. Mr. Granger requested a rusty knife. We should go, murmured Hermione. Harry, Ron and Luna all nodded quickly in agreement. Both boys put their arms around their respective girlfriends and closed their eyes, envisioning the place where they wanted to be. The familiar pull of apparition took over, ensuring his escape, and Harry released a relieved sigh as Dan Granger's last comment floated to his ears. Ah, but dear, he doesn't need children. The end. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.